devastating lands for 100 years, the Continental War was in its final moments, and a legendary figure operated from the shadows. His name was Riot Burger, a master of magical tool creation famous for defeating 10,000 enemies. He faced Calamity-class monsters that possessed enough power to destroy the world itself. With breathtaking agility, he activated his magical tools without giving his opponents any chance to react. Riot eliminated both the deadly beasts and the humans who dared to command those creatures on the battlefield. Following only the orders of his kingdom, he destroyed everyone who dared to draw a blade against him. However, as soon as the war ended, Riot disappeared without a trace, making his whereabouts a mystery. Many years later, in a quiet shop, an elderly man was cleaning a jar when he heard a young man call him grandfather. The boy approached the counter and asked if the old man knew a good method to train swordsmanship. The grandfather dismissed the idea, saying that it was something for barbarians, and asked Ray to help him gather the leaves in the yard. Ray complained about the task and reminded the old man that he used to wield a sword in the past as well. The old man calmly replied that it had been a long time, and that nowadays he could barely lift a blade. The young man mocked him, saying that the old man had fewer muscles than him, making the grandfather sigh at his grandson's laziness. Stretching, Ray admitted that he wanted to train to do well in the academy entrance exam. With a confident smile, the boy revealed that he had a big secret goal he intended to achieve there. Right after, Ray said goodbye and left, leaving the old man alone in the quietness of his shop. Seeing how much his grandson had grown, the old man smiled and realized that the time had come to take action. Looking toward the back of the shop, he hoped that Ray would stay alive until he could tell him his secret. The old man recalled the past and remembered that when Ray was born, he was still deep in bloody battles. At that time, his routine was facing relentless hordes of warriors on the battlefields. It was an endless spiral of violence where eliminating enemies had become his only daily purpose. Consumed by war, he eliminated others without hesitation and without showing any compassion. He believed he was fighting for the good of his country until the conflict ended up destroying what he loved most. Upon returning home, he found only flames and the burned photograph of his daughter with her husband. The family residence had been completely consumed by a devastating fire. On the floor, his daughter and son-in-law lay departed, victims of a brutal attack. Overcome by uncontrollable rage, he swore to hunt down those responsible and wipe out their entire bloodline. But in the middle of that scene of destruction, the sound of a baby crying interrupted his hatred. Protected beneath his mother's body, little Ray had miraculously survived the attack. Seeing the child alive, the legendary warrior's look changed completely. Kneeling beside his departed daughter, he extended his trembling hands toward the newborn. As he took little Ray into his arms, the child reached out his arms and touched his blood-stained face. The baby gave a pure, innocent, and lively smile to his grandfather. Tears streamed down the warrior's face, and that little boy became the light that pulled him out of the shadows. Back in the present, the old man clutches his chest and reaffirms his vow to protect the legacy left by his daughter. Determined to ensure Ray's safety, he heads toward a locked door at the back of the house. Wasting no time, he removes the heavy padlocks and chains keeping the place sealed. Descending the dark steps of the basement, he makes it clear that he would even break taboos to protect the boy. At the back of the basement, illuminated by lamps, a mysterious figure rests covered by a thick cloth. Pulling back the fabric, the old man reveals an artificial body identical to his young version from the war days. He contemplates the creation with seriousness, knowing the power and danger contained in that artifact. He touches his own chest, aware that his old and weakened body will not hold out much longer. Knowing his limit, he prepares to use that forbidden artifact and transfer his consciousness. Suddenly, the voice of a customer coming from upstairs interrupts his plans. Going up to the counter, the old man attends to a masked man who claims to be looking for a mythical item. The old man's expression changes immediately, becoming fully alert in the presence of the stranger. The masked man steps forward quickly and reveals that it took a lot of effort to track down the legendary Riot Burger. Wielding a blade, the intruder calls him the assassin puppet and mentions the supreme magical tools created by him. Advancing at top speed, the individual makes it clear that he intends to steal all of Riot's creations. With a merciless attack, the mercenary strikes to eliminate the old man and take all his power for himself. The masked intruder smirked, impressed to see that the old man is still capable of fighting despite his age. Riot activates his magical ability, allowing him to create tools out of nowhere by channeling his own mana. He summons the sacred shield Aegis, an artifact capable of neutralizing attacks and granting absolute protection. Protected by the barrier, Riot looks seriously at his rival and demands to know how he found out about the mythical items. The mercenary gestures with his blade and mocks him, saying that glaring in anger will achieve nothing. Next, the intruder openly admits that he is just a hired hand following someone else's orders. Realizing that someone is behind the attack, Riot activates his creation ability to summon another tool. The energy explosion forces the mercenary to retreat quickly so as not to be hit directly. A dazzling light begins to condense in the old man's hands as he manifests a new weapon. He materializes the sacred sword Excalibur, an item that boosts his mana and physical capabilities to the maximum limit. Wielding the gleaming sword, Riot states that he will force the truth out of the intruder. Enveloped in an overwhelming aura, the veteran assumes an intimidating combat stance. He stares firmly at his opponent and demands to know where the true contractor is hiding. The mercenary admits that the old man's pressure is as incredible as rumors say, but maintains his irony. As he advances for a clash of blades, the intruder taunts him, saying that the decline of Riot's old body is evident. The physical impact between the weapons makes the old man groan in pain, feeling the weight of the strain on his joints. Hearing the noise of the battle, Ray appears at the door and stands in complete shock at seeing his grandfather fighting. Desperate for his grandson's safety, Riot shouts for Ray not to come closer, while the villain smiles upon noticing the boy. In the blink of an eye, the mercenary appears behind Ray and places a mysterious bell over the young man's head. The intruder uses the mythical item, Echo of Memories, ringing the bell to manipulate the boy's mind. Riot falls into despair upon recognizing that forbidden artifact capable of rewriting memories. Holding the young man's shoulder while his eyes are controlled, the intruder praises the excellent physical build of Riot's grandson. Under the spell's control, Ray draws his sword without showing any hesitation. The mercenary taunts the old man, saying that this situation will be too much for an old guy to handle. Without any control over his actions, Ray charges at high speed to attack his own grandfather. Riot is forced to block his grandson's strike with Excalibur, suffering as he sees the fury in the boy's eyes. The old man analyzes the situation and notes that he needs to defeat the summoner or deliver a strong shock to Ray's mind to break the spell. He realizes that the only fast way to free the boy without eliminating the villain is by delivering a direct blow to his head. With no other choice to save his grandson from manipulation, the old man makes the painful decision to strike the boy. Gathering strength in his fist, Riot apologizes to his grandson for being forced to do that. The old man lands a precise blow on the boy to generate enough shock to undo the brainwashing. The impact violently throws Ray far away, causing the young man to lose consciousness as he hits the structure. Seeing the boy down, the intruder taunts him, saying that the legendary warrior has no mercy even for his own family. Riot answers coldly that he knows how to gauge his own strength so as not to cause permanent damage to his grandson. Suddenly, the mercenary feels a terrifying aura emerge and realizes he is in danger. A colossal pillar of golden energy arises out of nowhere and cuts through the area with overwhelming power. Amidst the glow, an imposing hooded figure appears, saying that he was already expecting that result. The newcomer reveals himself as a powerful armored warrior, causing the mercenary to panic upon seeing his contractor. The intruder stands frozen, while Riot turns to face the true threat behind the invasion. The overwhelming presence of the new enemy makes the old man immediately break into a cold sweat. Riot recognizes with horror the monstrous aura emanating from that mysterious warrior. The client raises his gigantic sword to attack, making the old man lament that this is happening at his worst moment. The extreme stress of the battle causes Riot's weakened heart to suffer a painful collapse. Clutching his chest in agony, the old warrior spits blood at the exact moment the enemy blade comes down. Driven solely by willpower, Riot manages to block the overwhelming strike using Excalibur. Even with his legs weakening under the weight, he states that his body may have aged, but his mind and skill remain intact. With a roar of determination, the old man gathers the rest of his strength to push back the enemy attack. However, in a cruel blow, Ray appears from behind and drives a sword straight through his grandfather's stomach. Bleeding from the mouth, the old master looks back in shock, seeing that he was stabbed by his own controlled grandson. With the shock of the blow, the red glow in Ray's eyes begins to fade, leaving the boy completely confused. Regaining consciousness, Ray looks at his own hands and calls out for his grandfather in total confusion. The young man panics upon seeing that the blade he is holding is covered in fresh blood. Taking advantage of the moment of shock, the armored warrior delivers a devastating strike that destroys everything around. As the dust begins to settle, Ray was groaning in pain on the ground, trying to understand what happened. Seeing his grandfather down and gravely injured right ahead, the boy panics and screams for him. The dark figure of the warrior appears behind Ray and coldly orders the young man to get out of his way. Fallen on the dust and bleeding heavily, the old man realizes that his body is too damaged to move. In a state of helplessness, the old master fears that the worst will happen to his grandson. Even injured, Ray bravely steps in front of his grandfather and orders the intruder not to take another step. The boy threatens to attack if the villain touches the old man again, receiving only an icy stare in return. From the ground, the grandfather frantically begs Ray to stop and not face that monster. The old man shouts a warning that this opponent is on another level and tells his grandson to run away as fast as possible. The armored warrior stares at the young man with a cold look, showing no sign of hesitation. Without saying a single word, the warrior takes a heavy step toward the boy. Desperate to protect his grandfather, Ray lets out a shout and charges with his sword to attack. As the boy rushes forward, the old man screams in terror, knowing the mortal danger his grandson is facing. With a single merciless movement, the armored warrior strikes down Ray without any difficulty. Horror is reflected in the old man's eyes as he watches his grandson be brutally brought down. The old master whispers Ray's name in despair as he sees the young man's body hit the ground. Turning his back, the warrior scolds the masked mercenary for leaving witnesses behind. Crawling with extreme difficulty, the old man reaches out his hand, trying to touch his lifeless grandson. The villain looks back and scoffs, recalling that Riot was once the strongest warrior of all. With an air of superiority, he asserts that those glory days are permanently in the past. In a dark space within his mind, Riot's soul cries out in agony for having failed to save the boy. Painfully, he recalls the moment he rescued the baby and all the happy years they spent together. The memory of his grandson's genuine smile burns deeply within the old warrior's chest. The pain of loss turns into an uncontrollable hatred, and Riot vows to get revenge no matter the cost. The system confirms that the final death condition has been met, releasing the full limit of his creation ability. Due to the awakening, the legendary master's soul begins to be transferred to the magical tool. In the secret basement, the artificial body awakens enveloped by an overwhelming storm of magical energy. Reincarnated in his young form, the master opens his eyes with a cold and completely lethal look. He reflects on the mythical items, the supreme creations he developed throughout his life. They are forbidden artifacts capable of casting specific magic simply by being fed with mana. These supreme tools were created to dominate time, space, and souls themselves. Due to their power to shake the world, rulers from all regions desperately coveted these weapons. Among them, there was a magical pipe capable of allowing the user to view the future. Another creation functioned as spatial wings, capable of performing leaps across dimensions. There was also a golden key capable of opening minds and extracting the most hidden secrets. In addition, he had created a mystical harp designed to manipulate the emotions of whoever heard it. However, most of these relics vanished without a trace when Riot disappeared in the past. Back at the shop ruins, the masked mercenary complains about the trail of destruction left by his contractor. He grumbles that such a flashy attack will attract witnesses and make the cleanup much harder. Deciding to reward himself for the job, the villain steals the glowing magical core from the old man's body. But suddenly, young Riot emerges from the shadows using the mythical item Reincarnation Puppet. With eyes burning in lethal fury, the master stares at the scoundrel who destroyed his peaceful life. Riot manifests the guillotine cutter, an execution blade stained with blood made to destroy. He condemns the intruders for attacking a child and warns that all actions bring severe consequences. The masked mercenary falls into total panic upon seeing the legendary master rejuvenated right before him. Before the intruder can make any move, Riot vanishes at breathtaking speed. With a precise and merciless execution strike, the reborn master sliced the mercenary without giving him a chance to defend himself. With his gaze consumed by fury, Riot promises he will make those responsible pay dearly for every life destroyed. After the end of the clash, the reborn master remains among the hazy ruins of the destroyed village. He digs a grave in the earth with a shovel to give his grandson a dignified burial. As he prepares the grave, Riot whispers Ray's name, consumed by profound sadness. He recalls the boy's childhood, when Ray was a cheerful child who ran around and called out to him excitedly. He also remembers their meals together, when his grandson playfully complained when his grandfather took his food. He remembers the little boy appearing at his bedroom door at night, saying softly that he couldn't sleep. And he remembers the young man's radiant smile, promising he would reveal his big secret dream after the exam. Before his grandson's tomb, the old master grieves in pain for never having found out what Ray wanted to do with his life. His mind then turns to the armored assassin, the relentless warrior known only as the Client. Overcome by a cold resolve, Riot vows to track the assassin to the end of the world to make him pay. Furthermore, he needs to recover the stolen mythical items, searching for clues on the body of the mercenary he executed. Searching through the intruder's remains, his eyes find an object attached to the dead man's uniform. He analyzes the necklace and recognizes the pendant as an artifact belonging to the mysterious Yugen tribe. The master summons the Stardust Compass, a tool capable of reading an object's energy and locating its owner. Placing the pendant on the artifact, Riot decides to follow every clue until he finds the client's whereabouts. The compass projects a luminous map, indicating the exact location of the Yugen tribe's base. Upon arriving at the location indicated by magic, the master confirms he has found the faction's hideout. The location belongs to the Yugen tribe, a secret clan famous for its dark and lethal techniques. With the soul-reading ability, they extract memories from corpses, serving as an espionage unit during the war. Riot enters the hidden village in the Valley of Bones, the territory where clan members hide. He reflects that, since his disappearance, almost no one knew his routine, making an ordinary search impossible. He deduces that the clan eliminated and read the memories of everyone who crossed their path in the past until locating him. Suddenly, an assassin from the clan emerges from the shadows and presses a sharp blade against Riot's neck. The masked guard demands to know who he is, warning that only clan members know that place. Several hooded assassins emerge from the fog, threatening to strike him down right there if he doesn't answer. Riot merely scoffs at the threat, asking if they really think an intruder would answer politely. Irritated by the intruder's audacity, the guard strikes directly to behead Riot on the spot. The blade hits the master's neck, but shatters completely upon colliding with the invulnerable artificial body. The assassin stands in absolute shock seeing his weapon destroyed without causing a single scratch on the intruder. With a single stomp on the ground, Riot generates an overwhelming shockwave that destroys the surrounding structure. The other Yugen tribe members retreat in terror, realizing that the blade broke upon touching the individual. Noticing that physical attacks do not work, the assassins decide to channel attack magic to crush him. They fire a concentrated magical blast, wanting only to leave remains to extract memories from. A massive explosion hits Riot head-on, covering the entire environment with smoke and debris. As the dust clears, Riot calmly walks out of the smoke, dusting off his coat without a single scratch. The assassins step back in utter terror upon seeing the man unharmed, asking if he is some kind of monster. With an icy glare, Riot notes that they must have hunted down every single person who had contact with him in the past. Overcome by dark fury, the master asks how many innocent lives they took just to track him down. While the guard stammers in fear, Riot tells him to shut his mouth and activates his creation ability. He materializes the Iron Maiden, a gigantic steel structure designed for extreme torture. Staring at the assassins with a terrifying gaze, the master warns that he has no interest in their excuses. Riot declares that the only thing he wants to hear is their screams of pain while the sarcophagus closes. Terrifying screams echo through the valley as the assassin's blood leaks through the metal structure. Multiple irony. Maidens appear in the village square, executing the entire clan in silence as riot advances. Among the bodies, a single passed-out survivor begins to regain consciousness with difficulty. Opening his eyes, the individual panics upon seeing that his entire clan was wiped out inside the torture devices. Riot appears before the survivor, who crawls on the ground in terror, asking what the intruder wants. The master draws an interrogation blade and tells the individual not to think, just to answer what he is asked. Pressing the blade against the survivor's neck with an intent to kill, Riot demands to know where the client is hiding. In a dark underground room, a man appears tied to a chair, dripping blood after an interrogation. Turning his back to the individual, Riot realizes that this tribe member knew nothing useful about the client. Even after searching every corner of the clan's base, the master found only a list containing former contractors. Analyzing the papers, Riot notices names of high-ranking officials and elite merchants, but realizes pages are missing from the list. He sighs upon noticing that the pages containing the true mastermind's identity were torn out in advance. The master deduces that the client must be someone influential and extremely strong, perhaps an S-rank adventurer. He recalls the words spoken by the assassin during their confrontation, when he asserted that Riot was once the strongest. With a sharp gaze, Riot realizes that the enemy certainly knew him personally from the time of the war. Stowing the remaining papers away, the master decides to avoid jumping to conclusions until he gets more information. Reviewing the saved files, Riot finds a specific dossier and decides on his next destination. The document shows the photo of a man wearing glasses and a vest, an old acquaintance from his combat days. To find out who the client is, Riot knows he will need the help of an information specialist. Looking at the face in the file, he concludes there is only one person capable of helping him in this search. Riot travels to a quiet and elegant city where his former army comrade lives. Wearing his dark coat, the reborn master walks through the garden gate toward the residence. He approaches the quiet mansion, preparing to reunite with his old war friend. Riot enters the place without making a sound, stepping softly on the house's wooden floor. Walking through the main room, he observes the furniture and paintings scattered around. On the table, the master spots a picture frame with a photo of his former comrade's family. Suddenly, a man comes from behind and throws a powerful punch toward Riot's head. Demonstrating flawless reflexes, the master dodges the attack without even losing his posture. The attacker, revealed as Lit Brown, steps back surprised and demands to know who the young intruder is. Taking a combat stance, Lit stares at the young man and asks fearfully why he looks so much like Riot. Riot responds calmly, saying it is a very cold reception for two old friends reuniting. Hearing that voice and looking into the young man's eyes, Lit widens his eyes in absolute shock. Without hesitation, Lit activates his Iron Arm ability and charges forward with an energized fist. He unleashes a devastating punch, generating a gust of wind that sweeps the entire room. The force of the impact is so brutal that the glass in the mansion's windows shatters completely. Amidst the explosion's dust, Lit calls out for the intruder with a serious and tense expression. Riot easily blocks the strike using only one hand, asking why his friend is attacking. Irritated by his rival's ease, Lit tells him to shut up and throws another violent blow. Dodging effortlessly, Riot thinks with irony if his former colleague really didn't recognize him. He dodges again with fluid movements, making Lit's attack hit only air. Lit notices the flawless way the young man moves and immediately recognizes that style. Pivoting his heel precisely on the floor, Riot prepares to put an end to that nonsense. He approaches his friend quickly and firmly repeats that he really is his old partner. Riot lands a well-aimed kick on Lit's guard, complaining about having to repeat the same thing multiple times. Although he manages to block with his iron arms, the force of the kick slams Lit violently against the ground. Fallen on the rubble, Lit groans in pain, feeling the absurd weight of that blow. Seeing his comrade stretched out on the floor, Riot runs a hand over his neck and admits he might have overdone it. As the dust settles, Lit finally accepts that the young man before him is indeed the legendary Riot. Sitting in his living room, Lit Brown, Riot's former war partner, rubs his forehead in shock. Calmly sipping a cup of tea, Riot jokes that he was upset about not being recognized. Lit yells angrily, saying that nobody grows young out of nowhere and that it was impossible to guess that. The veteran gestures and complains that the master's hit felt even stronger than back in his prime. Riot explains that he used magical tools, thinking a former member of the Royal Patrols would notice. Lit sighs and leans back in his armchair, remembering that his patrol days were in the distant past. Looking out the window, the veteran comments on how drastically the world changed after the war ended. He recalls that people finally stopped fighting and began rebuilding what they had lost. Lit concludes that now everyone is focused solely on achieving a better and more peaceful life. Lit explains that he retired, built a family, and became an influential merchant in the capital's network. Riot remarks that it was a nice promotion, and Lit proudly agrees with the quiet life he achieved. Looking at the young master, Lit asks what he is planning by reappearing with the exact same look from the past. Riot remains silent for a moment, assuming a rather serious and melancholy expression. In a sad tone of voice, the master reveals to his old friend that he had also become a grandfather. Noticing the heavy atmosphere, Riot asks if Lit is willing to listen to the long and painful story that brought him there. Inside the quiet room, the master relates the entire tragedy he experienced up to the loss of his grandson. After listening to the whole account, Lit lowers his gaze with a deeply heavy expression. Taking a sip of tea, the veteran grieves and acknowledges that his friend went through a true hell. Lit concludes that Riot found his name on the Yugen clan's list and came to his house seeking help. Riot mocks the fact that his friend uses underworld services, saying he never imagined seeing a former patrolman on that list. Lit justifies himself by saying that commerce requires certain contacts and asks what Riot intends to do from now on. Clenching his fist tightly, the master asserts that his path is already completely set. With his eyes glowing in a dark shade, he declares that his sole objective now is vengeance. Lit stares at him with concern and asks if revenge is truly what little Ray would want him to do. Riot gives a cold smile and replies that nobody can know what the boy would truly want. The master asserts that this is his way of taking responsibility and making the guilty pay for the crime. He adds that his mission is not just for Ray, but also because of the danger the world is facing. The master reminds him that the stolen mythical items represent a catastrophic threat in the wrong hands. He warns that if these artifacts are used without control, the structure of the world itself could be altered. As the creator of these supreme tools, Riot guarantees he will never allow such a disaster to happen. Lit agrees with the gravity of the situation and asks if the plan is to hunt down the client to recover everything. Riot confirms he needs his friend's help, and Lit makes himself available to obtain whatever is necessary. The master hands over a folded piece of paper and asks the merchant to gather all the materials listed on it. With a dangerous smile, Riot reveals that he will forge a new magical tool focused on destroying the client. Stowing the paper away, Lit accepts the mission without hesitation and promises to provide every single item. Right after, the master mentions that he will need one more crucial piece of information from the underworld. Knowing his friend's old contacts, Riot asks for the location of the secret guild where information is concentrated. He seeks the entrance to the Table of Ruin, which leads him to the imposing Kubrick Library. Known as the largest archive in the capital, the library hides its true purpose behind its public facade. Walking among the shelves, Riot touches the books to activate the secret mechanism of the place. By moving the volumes in the correct order, the hidden system unlocks the secret passage. The bookshelf shifts, revealing a hidden door that leads directly into the darkness of the basement. The master descends the spiral staircase toward the headquarters of the Dark Guild. Reaching the end of the steps, Riot observes the underground hall illuminated by a magical aura. He contemplates the Table of Ruin, the hub where the underworld's greatest secrets are traded. Suddenly, a brute jumps from above with a club to attack the new visitor without warning. Riot easily blocks the heavy attack using just a simple magic barrier. Holding the rival's weapon without moving, the master comments on the guild's aggressive welcome. The attacker, a bounty hunter named Randold, laughs and says that welcomes work like that around there. Randold accompanies the master to the main counter to introduce him to the guild's receptionist. The receptionist, Mina, greets them with a friendly smile, warning that all jobs there are extremely dangerous. Chefily, she warns that weak members perish quickly and cause losses for the guild to clean up the mess. Even with the warning, Riot firmly confirms that he came to the location specifically to register. Mina explains that there will be an admission test and asks for the name the master intends to use in the guild. Riot thinks of an alias, knowing that any old name could be tracked by the enemy. He searches for a name that carries his vow and fits a man seeking vengeance. A gleam of determination emerges in the master's eyes as he makes his final decision. Closing his eyes with a confident smile, he chooses the perfect tribute for his journey. Riot looks at the receptionist and asks to be registered in the guild under the name Ray. Thinking for a few moments about how he should identify himself, he decides to choose a simple name for this registration. With a light smile on his face, he asks the attendant to register him simply as Ray. The girl accepts the name immediately and notifies him that the guild's registration test is about to begin. Curious about the procedure, Ray asks if a test will really be necessary, and she confirms pleasantly. The staff member then steps forward and says she will explain the details of the exam while guiding them through the area. As they walk through an underground hallway, she explains that the guild categorizes all its missions by rank levels. The system functions across 7 tiers, ranging from F rank to S rank, with even the simplest tasks harboring a real risk of death. It is for this reason that all newcomers must undergo evaluation, ensuring the guild maintains only capable members. Smiling, she reinforces that they cannot trust work to unprepared individuals, since the guild operates as a serious business. Listening to that, Ray reflects in silence on how unfortunate it is that a business focused on risking lives continues to thrive in times of peace. To strike up a conversation with the large man beside him, the young man asks if he will also participate in the same evaluation. The man answers with an insane smile, saying that there he gets paid to do any kind of illegal job he wants. He adds that if he chooses the right contracts, he will be able to eliminate as many people as he wants without any consequences. Overcome by a sick excitement, the man feels his entire body vibrate just imagining the slaughter to come. Arriving at the exam door, the receptionist casually comments that the guild constantly receives bloodthirsty types like him. Upon entering the large arena, Ray attentively observes the macabre environment where the test will take place. The staff member presents the arena as the Pit of Cursed Offerings, the exact place where the test will occur. Wasting no time, she directs Ray and the other candidate to go down the staircase to the center of the pit. The young man walks calmly toward the arena, ready to face whatever challenge the exam imposes. Ray and the other competitors finally reach the floor of the pit, gathering with the rest of the group. From high up on the structure, the attendant gets everyone's attention and asks if they are ready to start. One of the hot-headed participants shouts angrily, demanding that she start the test at once and threatening to attack her. Unfazed by the provocation, the girl merely scoffs at the impatience of the candidates waiting there. Right after, she lightly changes her tone of voice and tells everyone to look directly at the ground beneath their feet. Confused by the order, some warriors look down without understanding what she means. Suddenly, floor tiles begin to shift, revealing an immense pit of boiling lava right beneath the group. Ray immediately feels the absurd heat emanating from the floor while tension grips everyone present. The staff member explains that the platform will gradually retract into the walls, leaving only one way to survive. Looking up, the protagonist notices heavy chains hanging from the room's ceiling. The girl announces that as soon as the floor fully retracts, everyone who remains alive will be passed. With a wave goodbye from the top of the pit, she wishes good luck for everyone to give their best. Seeing the chains above, some participants panic, finding the height unreachable. However, a guy wearing glasses celebrates the situation, confident that his skills give him an advantage in the air. Using an aerial movement technique called celestial steps, he begins leap through the air toward the chains. Annoyed at seeing the man get ahead, another candidate yells at him while the mage reaches out his hand to hold on. Except a mercenary wearing a bandana activates the vector alteration ability, focused on changing his opponent's trajectory. With a simple movement of his fingers, the man redirects the jump's force and causes the guy with glasses to lose control. Unable to keep himself airborne, the individual plummets in despair straight toward the burning pit. The vector user mocks the fall, stating that trying to save oneself alone in that place is immense naivety. But before he could celebrate, the shirtless brute appears out of nowhere and lands a devastating punch on the shooter's face. Laughing insanely, the giant shouts that merely surviving would be too boring and decides to resort to brute force. He begins to butcher everyone around, swearing he will eliminate every competitor until only he is left to pass. Watching the chaos ensue, another warrior realizes that the exam was designed from the beginning to cause a bloodbath. The arena turns into true carnage, with candidates fighting desperately for the few chains above. With folded arms in the middle of combat, Ray mentally questions if that violent struggle is the only requirement of the test. Analyzing the situation with extreme coldness, the young man suspects the exam hides some greater purpose behind so much slaughter. That's when the muscular brute charges forward at high speed directly toward Ray to bring him down. The giant taunts the young man, telling him to stop acting tough and inviting him to a real fight. Without even breaking his stance, Ray defeats an opponent instantly before the brute's charge even connects. Looking with deep contempt at the attacker, the young man warns that it's useless to try, as he wouldn't last even 3 seconds. Angered by the mockery, the giant flies into a rage, but Ray coldly advises him to focus on what really matters to pass the test. The protagonist points to the ceiling and warns that eliminating everyone there will be useless if he cannot reach the chains. The brute ponders the explanation, agrees that he has a point, and decides to test an idea right away. Without thinking twice, he grabs one of the candidates and violently hurls him toward the ceiling to see what happens. Flying through the air, the thrown man manages to reach out his arm and grab one of the hanging chains. However, the moment he touches the metal, a burning reaction full of sparks burns his hands. The man lets out an agonizing cry of pain upon realizing that the metal of the chains is completely boiling. Unable to hold on, the poor guy plummets straight down into the opening lava floor below. Watching the scene safely, the giant admits he almost fell for Ray's talk and narrowly avoided trouble. Watching the candidate be consumed by fire, the brute notes that the chains are too hot to be grabbed directly. However, upon understanding the trick of the exam, the man smiles mischievously and asserts that now solving the problem has become easy. He approaches 2 other terrified participants and grabs them by force before they can react. Desperate from the brutality, the men try to break free while being pulled upward. The giant uses the 2 poor guys as a human shield, holding onto their clothes while they are forced to grab the scalding chain. The men burn their backs on the boiling metal, while the brute supports himself on them without suffering any damage. From high up on the structure, the staff member watches everything with a smile and comments on how daring his method was. Holding on firmly to his human support, the giant taunts the victims and thanks them for suffering in his place. Watching that cowardly attitude from afar, Ray displays deep disgust at the man's lack of character. The brute even taunts Ray from above, warning that the floor is about to disappear completely. In a mocking tone, the giant laments that there are no more sacrifices left for the boy to use as support. The floor retracts completely, causing the last survivors to fall into the sea of lava, while Ray remains alone on the edge. Hearing the word sacrifice, the young man stares at his opponent with a cold and calm gaze. Asserting with conviction that he needs none of that to win, he launches himself into the air with a powerful boost. In a fraction of a second, Ray appears in front of the giant and lands a crushing stomp right in the middle of the brute's face. Using his attacker's own face as a stepping stone, the young man gains height and reaches the metal chain above. Ray holds the boiling chain with his bare hand and silently notes that his body is completely immune to that absurd heat. Meanwhile, in the square in front of the Order of the Knights of Sephir's headquarters, a large crowd gathers. Citizens chat enthusiastically about the opportunity to see the legendary Sword Star once again. The people acclaim that knight as the realm's greatest symbol of justice, capable of defeating terrible monsters with a single strike. For the populace, the mere presence of that warrior guaranteed the safety and peace of the entire nation. A girl in the crowd points to the top of the stairs and warns everyone that the knights have finally appeared. The square explodes in shouts and applause to welcome the acclaimed Sword Star. However, that warrior's serene look hides a serious and impassive composure before all the celebration. The noble Sir Haste walks impressively before the people who noisily acclaim him. Back at the guild test, observers on the upper balcony are surprised to see Ray climbing up the chains. A young man with braids named Noise and a mysterious woman comment on the new candidate's energy and determination. Reaching the top of the pit effortlessly, Ray steps onto the platform without showing any fatigue. The dark-haired woman smiles mischievously, commenting that the bloodshed wasn't quite enough yet. Meanwhile, the fallen giant shouts in anger down below, telling Ray to take his foot off his face. Ray just looks back with a subtle smile and taunts the brute for serving as a great stepping stone. With a light leap, the young man reaches the exit platform while the giant roars furiously below. The man frantically threatens Ray while the reception staff member approaches and congratulates the result. The girl officially announces that only the two of them managed to pass the guild's selection test. Picking up a writing feather, she says she will organize the registration, and Ray confirms if everyone starts at F rank. The staff member confirms with a smile and explains that members also have classifications identical to those of the missions. She details that everyone begins at the lowest tier and advances a level with each successfully completed request. Understanding the system, Ray concludes that completing tasks is enough, but she warns that even F-rank jobs hide mortal risks. Annoyed, the receptionist complains that many quit halfway through, leaving the staff to clean up the mess. She explains that members of the higher tiers have crossed the line between life and death countless times on extreme missions. Because of this, these top warriors are considered true veterans forged in battle. The receptionist continues explaining that A-rank members and above receive special privileges, while S-rank guarantees access to confidential data. She refers to the Confidential Archives Library, an immense magical repository housing the organization's best-kept secrets. Smiling with excitement, the girl mentions that the highest ranks also take on the most lucrative missions and encourages Ray to aim for the top. The young man realizes that this library must be the core of the Table of Ruin mentioned by Lit, the perfect place to find information about his contractor. Wasting no time on idle talk, Ray asks the attendant directly what the fastest path to reach S-rank is. Before she can answer, a cat-eared boy named Gaia steps up from behind and suggests with a smile that the answer is eliminating many people. The staff member is surprised to recognize the young boy and greets him respectfully as Lord Gaia. In silence, she remembers that this boy already had his promotion to S-rank duly approved by the guild. This is Gaia, the current first seat of A-rank and the most prominent warrior in that category. Ray stares closely at the boy, recognizing that he is standing before the absolute top of A-rank. The story reveals that he joined the guild at age 5, has already eliminated tens of thousands of targets, and is the youngest prodigy in the institution. Approaching mockingly, Gaia asks if the rookie really intends to reach S-rank. With a sadistic look and sharp teeth, the boy asserts right to Ray's face that it will never happen. He recalls that throughout the entire selection test, Ray merely stood by watching the chaos around him without lifting a finger. Looking deep into the young man's eyes, Gaia highlights that he did not eliminate a single person during the exam. Pressing against Ray's chest, the boy says he can smell his intentions from a distance. He whispers that Ray exudes a repulsive stench of false virtue for sparing his enemies. Ray simply listens to the provocation in silence, mentally repeating the term false virtue. Gaia questions why anyone would leave an adversary alive who could turn around and try to slit their throat later. Walking around Ray, the boy acknowledges that he has the skill to eliminate targets, but lacks the proper mindset. Striking an insane pose, he shouts that the only real rule is to wipe out enemies completely. Ray continues listening to the entire bloodthirsty sermon without showing any reaction or emotional distress. Gaia insists that the guild is made for people who love to see blood spill and who abandoned common morality long ago. Pointing at Ray's chest, the boy warns that if he continues being soft like this, he will end up gone very quickly. Instead of being intimidated by the warning, Ray gives a light, mocking laugh right in the prodigy's face. Irritated by the reaction, Gaia demands to know what is so funny, and Ray simply raises his hand calmly. The protagonist places his hand on the boy's shoulder in a friendly, relaxed manner. Leaning in with a sarcastic smile, Ray says that seeing the future S-rank care so much about him even warms his heart. The unexpected reaction leaves the young prodigy completely surprised and unsettled. Except Ray's gaze instantly turns into something dark, stating that he has serious goals and cannot waste time on useless distractions. Slowly sliding his hand toward the boy's neck, Ray shifts his tone of voice completely. With his eyes glowing in a deadly threat, the protagonist asserts that if eliminating him guaranteed the spot in S-rank, he would rip his head off that very second. Frightened by the overwhelming aura, Gaia slaps Ray's hand away and backs off, shouting not to be touched as if they were friends. Consumed by anger, the boy begins to unleash his power and questions how a simple F-rank newcomer dares to threaten him. His claws and aura begin to manifest a terrifying bestial energy as he loses control. Taking on a frightening animalistic form, Gaia rants that in a real fight, Ray wouldn't last 10 seconds against him. Unfazed by the transformation, Ray merely prepares the magical tool creation ability with his hands. However, the giant assassin hunter comes up from behind Ray and butts into the conversation, saying he shouldn't make plans without him. Shouting in the protagonist's ear, the brute promises that he will be the one to eliminate the young man first. Without even turning to look at the attacker, Ray merely offers a cold, uninterested response. He warns the man that once gone, he won't even have the chance to feel regret. Furious at the boy's audacity, the giant loses control and roars, demanding to know what he just said. The brute charges forward without hesitation and violently grabs Ray's head from behind. He rants that Ray has a lot of nerve talking back to the assassin hunter and vows to crush his face right there. Sighing in boredom, Ray activates the magical tool creation ability and summons the picket iron stakes connected by sharp vibrating wires. Holding the metal pins with extreme composure, the young man reminds him that he warned about the danger. In the blink of an eye, high-speed red lines crisscross the giant's body and head in multiple directions. The assassin hunter's body is sliced to pieces in an instant, spurting blood everywhere in front of Gaia and the attendant. Blood stains the wall while Ray remains standing in the same spot without a single drop of dirt or sign of effort. Watching the brutal execution, Gaia takes a step forward and mocks him, saying he only defeated a nobody. Consumed by rage, Gaia launches himself full force toward Ray, telling the boy not to get so full of himself. Ray calmly analyzes the attack and notes that Gaia's power and speed are flawless, worthy of a future S rank. Except the protagonist notices an obvious flaw and prepares a new magical artifact in his hands. He summons the Scarlet Whip of Lamentation and points out that the boy makes the mistake of always attacking in a straight line. Using his animalistic agility, Gaia manages to dodge the whip strike by a hair's breadth. The boy mocks the strike, shouting that a simple trick like that means nothing to him. Anticipating the movement, Ray already appears positioned right behind him and prepares a defensive magical shield. Gaia's violent strike collides directly against the blue barrier created by Ray. The impact generates a shockwave that repels the boy's charge far away. Skidding across the floor, Gaia quickly recovers and snarls in anger for being blocked so easily. Ray watches the young boy with boredom and comments that he is a rather stubborn individual. With a macabre smile full of sharp teeth, Gaia shouts that he isn't just stubborn, but extremely strong. From the upper floor, Noise Hamon watches the fight in silence and notes Ray's magical tool creation skill. Analyzing the young man's combat style, the dark-haired woman begins to suspect his true identity. Gaia launches himself again at high speed, promising to prove that his power goes far beyond stubbornness. He unleashes a frantic sequence of attacks around Ray's magical shield, trying to find an opening. Ray tracks the frantic movements without any surprise and notes that the boy is even faster. Thinking he found an opening in the defense, Gaia smiles sadistically and celebrates thinking he got his opponent. However, his charge is stopped brutally by another layer of Ray's magical barrier, leaving the boy in shock. Leaning in coldly, Ray observes the boy closely and comments that he is still too young. With his eyes glowing in an intense blue hue, the protagonist warns that he will teach him that there is always someone superior. Up from above, Noise remains intrigued by that so familiar and refined fighting style. Instead of being intimidated, Gaia vibrates with excitement at Ray's power and lets out an insane laugh. Releasing even more power, the boy states that now he has an uncontrollable urge to fight. Leaping through the air like an uncontrolled predator, he roars that he wants to eliminate Ray at all costs. Blocking the attack effortlessly, Ray coldly warns that with that impulsive personality, he will end up gone very young. Irritated by the lecture, Gaia tells the young man to shut up and lands a powerful kick on the barrier. Consumed by rage, the boy shouts that he hates nosy people who try to give advice. He strikes the ground violently, destroying the floor around as he tries to break Ray's defense. Gaia continues attacking uncontrollably, but Ray's barrier remains completely unshakable. Maintaining absolute composure, the protagonist doesn't even move while sustaining his magic. A large burst of energy repels Gaia once again, forcing the boy back against the wall. Even bleeding slightly, the boy laughs like crazy, showing how much he enjoys the battle. Ray adjusts his magical artifact and challenges the boy to truly fight once and for all. Gaia charges forward again for direct confrontation, shouting with excitement as he approaches the protagonist. Suddenly, the shadow of a giant snake rises behind them both, and an icy voice orders Gaia to stop. It is Noise Hamiln, the third seat of S rank, who tells the boy not to get overly carried away. Furious at the interruption, Gaia rants at Noise not to meddle because Ray is his prey. Calling the boy a disobedient child, the dark-haired woman activates her magical power. The gigantic shadow snake attacks Gaia by surprise, landing a violent strike that makes the boy gush blood. Noise approaches gracefully beside Ray and warns that, for Gaia's own good, he should listen to his elders. Kneeling on the ground and severely injured, the boy snarls in frustration while Ray watches him in silence. Indignant, Gaia tries to stand up and demands that they stop treating him as if he were a toy. Ray notices in surprise that the severe wounds on the boy's body are beginning to regenerate at an absurd speed. Analyzing the duo in front of him, the young man mentally questions if those two can still be considered human. Noise turns to Ray with an enigmatic smile and asks him to put away his weapon, asking if he wouldn't prefer to leave there alive. Realizing that the woman is much stronger than the boy, Ray deactivates his artifact, focusing solely on his main objective. Walking with soft steps, Noise approaches behind Ray and asks if she knows what he is really looking for. Whispering right in the protagonist's ear, the woman asks if his goal is access to the confidential archives library, leaving Ray surprised. She smiles mischievously and asserts that there is no other reason for someone to be obsessed with S rank, offering her help if he decides to obey her. Ray stares at Noise with suspicion and directly asks what her true intention is behind that offer. The woman explains that she also has goals to fulfill and that to do so, she needs obedient and capable subordinates. Approaching with sensuality, Noise touches Ray's face and says she is looking for someone young, handsome, and strong. Whispering up close, she reinforces that someone exactly like the protagonist would be perfect for her plans. Maintaining his composure, Ray steps back slightly and comments that the proposal sounds good, but the price charged is frightening. Noise turns to leave and warns that he can refuse, but promises she will obstruct his path as much as she can if he does so. The woman calls Gaia to leave, and the boy stands up furious, telling her not to give him orders. Before leaving, Gaia points at Ray and swears he will be the one to eliminate the protagonist the next time they meet. Watching the duo depart, Ray silently laments that the situation has become quite troublesome and annoying. However, the young man reflects that if this brings him closer to his real target faster, any effort will be worth it. With a focused gaze, the young man guarantees to himself that he will plow through any obstacle that arises in his path. A week passes, and the scene shifts to the main customer service counter at the guild. The receptionist stands completely shocked looking at the reports and asks out loud if Ray really completed everything. Ray calmly confirms in front of a gigantic pile of completed mission documents on the counter. The young man firmly asserts that he successfully completed all requests the guild sent to him over the last few days. Impressed and sweating cold, the attendant highlights that normally a volume like that would take at least 2 years to complete. Ray thinks to himself that such a duration would be normal only for an ordinary human being. He remembers that his current body does not need to sleep or eat and feels no fatigue, allowing him to work with absurd efficiency. Checking the reports, the staff member praises the flawless execution and guarantees that Ray's promotion to D rank is already confirmed. The young man asks what is required to reach C rank, and she explains that recommendations and named missions are necessary. The attendant reveals that he already possesses the recommendation of none other than Lady Noise Hamiln herself. Right after, she hands Ray a sealed envelope containing a special named mission request. Upon opening the letter, Ray reads the direct objective, an elimination mission targeted at a D-rank adventurer. The staff member points out how incredible it is to receive a direct nomination from Lady Noise herself for a job. She explains that this is extremely rare, since Noise is the leader of the largest faction in the entire guild. The attendant recalls that the last person personally recruited by her was Gaia, the number one in A rank. Rei remembers Noise's words about gathering excellent subordinates to achieve her goals. Analyzing the envelope, the protagonist wonders what that mysterious woman intends to do with such strong people. Inside the paper, he finds an enigmatic message inscribed with the words, "kiss or bite." Rei reads the instructions saying that if he doesn't want to be bitten, he must offer a kiss, understanding Noise's code. The scene shifts to the impressive facade of the Adventurers Guild in broad daylight. Inside the bustling hall, various adventurers gather, chatting and negotiating jobs. Entering the venue, Rei observes the area and mentally confirms that this is the agreed meeting point. The narration explains that the Adventurers Guild is a historic organization created even before the Great War. It is an ancient institution on the same level as the Dark Guild Table of Ruin, maintaining great influence in the world. A blond young man in noble attire approaches and asks if he is the adventurer named Rei. The young man introduces himself with a friendly smile as Alexis Sline, leader of the Steel Wings Party and a D-rank swordsman. Asking to be called just Alex, he shakes hands with Rei, who pretends to be an inexperienced rookie asking for guidance. Alexis celebrates the young man's arrival, explaining that adventurers with the magic bag ability are rare and very valuable. Rei smiles in a friendly manner and pretends to agree with the party leader's statement. The system details that the magic bag ability allows storing items in a separate spatial dimension. In truth, Rei uses magical tool creation to forge a dimensional vault and perfectly simulate that ability. The protagonist plans to use the rookie luggage carrier disguise to get close to his true elimination target. Alexis steps forward and says he will introduce the other members who make up the Steel Wings group. He introduces Kirisha as the healer sent by the church, and Ayn as the one responsible for reconnaissance and distractions. Kirisha Noir is a priestess and D-rank adventurer who observes Rei's arrival in absolute silence. Meanwhile, Ayn Bot, a D-rank thief, turns his face away arrogantly and says he has no interest in socializing with rookies. With a cold gaze, Ayn asserts that they will just complete the mission, collect the payment, and disband the group right after. Trying to lighten the tense mood, Alexis hugs his comrade and asks everyone to try to get along during the work. In another corner of the room, a mysterious hand holds a flower vase on the table. Annoyed by the touch, Ayn strikes Alexis's arm and knocks over the flower vase the leader was holding. Ayn tells his comrade to shut up, while Alexis laughs, apologizes, and admits he is terrible at reading the room. Watching the disagreement from afar, Rei thinks that he has been in many groups, but that lack of harmony is absurd. The protagonist reflects in silence that he doesn't know the reason why that man's elimination was ordered, but he must act. While wiping the vase water off his face, Alexis tries to maintain a friendly posture in front of the whole group. With a dark and focused gaze, Rei decrees in his thoughts that Alexis will need to perish for him to achieve his objective. A flashback to a week prior shows Alexis before the holograms of the Table of Ruin, confirming the location of an item. He promises his superiors that he will bring the artifact back if they leave the mission under his responsibility. Alexis smiles sadistically as he plans to acquire the mythical item left behind by Riot Burger. Back in the present, the group finds itself exploring the corridors of a danger-filled D-rank dungeon. Facing a mud golem, Ayn activates the deflect ability to completely nullify the creature's frontal attack. He blocks the enemy's flaming impact with an energy shield generated at the last second. The stone creature tries to crush the adventurers, but Ayn and Alexis quickly dodge the heavy strike. Leaping over the monster's head, Ayn prepares a dagger to deliver the finishing blow. He activates the deceive ability to create a false perception and confuse the golem's senses. Shouting in anger, the thief attacks the mud golem's head, focused on destroying its core. The precise strike hits the weak point of the structure, causing the creature to explode into pieces of stone. The golem is completely destroyed, turning into magic dust and releasing an energy stone. With the area clear, Ayn celebrates the victory and tells his comrades that they can now advance to the next room. Rei silently analyzes the combat and thinks that the group's pace is far too slow for a D-rank dungeon. He concludes that in times of peace, the technical standards of adventurers dropped significantly compared to the past. Picking up the magic stone left by the monster on the floor, Ayn turns and calls for Rei. The thief hands the item to the boy and tells him to store everything inside the magic bag immediately. Alexis smiles in the background and thanks the rookie's work, saying that his help makes the expedition much easier. Walking behind the group, Ray reflects that eliminating Alexis would be easy, but a perfect hit requires simulating a natural cause. The protagonist knows he cannot leave any evidence and concludes that choosing the right moment will be crucial. The group finally arrives before the large red doors that give access to the dungeon boss's chamber. The doors slowly open, revealing an immense hall illuminated by the fire of torches. In the center of the area arises the dungeon boss, a colossal creature known as the giant golem. Alexis points to the altar at the back and reminds everyone that the real goal is to retrieve the treasure chest. On top of the pedestal rests a large wooden chest reinforced by metal chains and a magical padlock. The leader explains that inside the chest lies a valuable magical tool that will secure the group's fortune for a long time. Alexis smiles and says that if they manage to get the chest, it won't be necessary to defeat the dungeon boss right away. Ein angrily questions the plan, stating that it is impossible to reach the treasure without defeating the monster first. The thief points to the giant and highlights that the pressure emanating from the creature will eliminate anyone who steps into the combat zone. Alexis agrees with a sinister smile on his face, maintaining a calm and controlled tone of voice. He reveals that even the Flame Dragon clan, the realm's largest adventurer group, had to retreat from that fight multiple times. Ein becomes desperate and shouts that it is madness to try to face a monster that a legendary clan couldn't defeat. Alexis steps forward calmly and guarantees there is no reason for panic as he prepared a special trick. Without any warning, Alexis attacks Priestess Kirisha from behind with a swift blade strike. The girl is caught totally by surprise as blood squirts from her chest and cuts through the air. Kirisha is thrown gravely wounded directly into the boss's combat zone, making Ein scream in desperation. The giant golem awakens at the intruder and moves forward to crush her, but Ein launches himself into the air to protect his comrade. Watching the chaos from afar with a sadistic smile, Alexis coldly comments that the monster has finally awakened. Holding the priestess in his arms, Ein roars, consumed by rage against the leader, demanding explanations for the betrayal. Alexis tells him not to shout and explains that he used a secret of the room, where entering combat opens a hidden path. Stone blocks begin to emerge from the nearby sea of lava, forming a direct bridge to the treasure platform. Coldly, Alexis says that this path will allow taking the chest and completing the mission without needing to fight the boss. Embracing the bleeding Kirisha, Ein realizes the atrocity and shouts furiously, asking if he used the girl as bait. Laughing insanely, Alexis confirms the outrage and shouts that commoners like them exist solely to guarantee his easy life. The man stares at the blonde noble and mocks the situation, saying he talks too much for someone who just fell from nobility. The noble reacts immediately with contempt and tells the man to shut his mouth, calling him sewer filth. With a dark gaze, the blonde warns that he knows perfectly well about the secret they are trying to hide. He reveals that he is aware of everything regarding the man's involvement with Kirisha and the unholy acts committed by them. The warrior stands in shock upon realizing he was exposed, while Kirisha remains quiet by his side. The noble reminds them that a nun losing her purity is a grave taboo for the church, and that an exposure will bring the Inquisition. Flashing a wicked smile, he stares at the couple to make the gravity of the threat abundantly clear. Right after, he directly asks Kirisha if she knows the terrible fate that awaits her should he expose them. Beside himself with rage, the warrior steps up and grabs the blonde by his collar, cursing the scoundrel. Without losing his posture, the noble mocks him and asks if he really has time to worry about that in the middle of combat. He points to the arena and warns that the gigantic fire golem has already picked its next target. The colossal creature locks its gaze directly onto Kirisha, leaving the girl paralyzed with fear. Giving no time to react, the golem raises its heavy fist and charges with an overwhelming strike. The brutal impact crushes the ground, causing a massive explosion of rocks and flames across the area. As soon as the dust settles, the warrior appears protecting Kirisha and asks anxiously if she can still move. However, the golem gives no breathing room and already begins preparing for a new attack in their direction. With no other choice, the man carries Kirisha in his arms and tries to dodge the monster's charge desperately. Seeing the scene from afar, the blonde noble merely smiles and decides to leave the couple to fend for themselves against the threat. He turns to Ray and demands that the young man go at once to the treasure chest to secure it without wasting time. The blonde explains that if the duo perishes, the secret route will close, so they need to grab the item before that happens. He approaches Ray and says that with the magic bag the young man possesses, transporting the chest's contents will be easy. Ray remains silent, observing the noble's selfish attitude without displaying an immediate reaction. While the blonde impatiently shouts at him to hurry up, Ray thinks to himself that he understands perfectly why that despicable man's elimination was ordered. Instead of going toward the chest, Ray walks in the opposite direction and warns that he won't abandon anyone on the brink of death. With firm steps, he heads straight to meet the giant fire golem threatening the couple. The noble shouts surprised at Ray's attitude, mocking him and saying that a mere porter can do nothing against that monster. He shouts that Ray will just end up gone for nothing, but the young man gives a light smile as he begins to channel his power. Without hesitation, Ray activates his magical item creation ability and summons the sacred sword Excalibur. With a single overwhelming motion, Ray unleashes a brilliant slash of pure magical energy that cuts across the environment. The blade's intense glow leaves both the noble and the couple completely shocked by the scene. Right after the attack, Ray calmly closes his eyes as the magical energy dissipates around him. The warrior and Carisha look at Ray, unable to believe the absurd power he just demonstrated. Ray approaches the couple, apologizes, and pulls a small magical item from his inventory. Using the perfume of silence, he makes the duo fall into a deep sleep to ensure the area's safety. The blonde noble begins to tremble in terror upon realizing that the giant golem was destroyed with just a single strike. Terrified and pointing his finger, he demands to know who on earth that porter in front of him is. Ray maintains a serious gaze and prepares to answer the frightened noble's question. He reveals his true identity as Riot Burger and declares coldly that he is the man who came to eliminate him. The memory of that magical slash's overwhelming power still echoes in the destroyed environment. Looking at the remains of the golem split in half, the noble still cannot believe that the creature fell so easily. Desperate, he starts shouting again, and once more questions who exactly Ray is. The blonde repeats the name Riot Burger, totally incredulous at the revelation he just heard. He tries to laugh off the situation and mocks, saying that a mere rookie porter could never be the legend he is talking about. But soon reality sets in and he asks, overcome by panic, if Ray is also after the mythical item. Ray is slightly surprised to hear the noble mention the existence of a mythical item in that location. Noticing the reaction, the blonde loses control and accuses Ray of approaching him only because he discovered the chest's secret. With an insane smile, he shouts that the treasure belongs to him and that he won't let anyone take it. Suddenly, a giant magical blade plunges into the ground right in front of the noble, scaring him deeply. Ray calmly walks past him and warns that since he was the one who defeated the golem, he is the one who will open the chest. Furious and helpless, the blonde rants behind Ray's back, accusing him of hiding his mana just to steal the prize at the end. Ray finally opens the treasure chest and finds 4 vials containing reddish-colored potions. Upon examining one of the bottles, he immediately realizes that it is a common recovery potion, not a mythical item. Ray concludes that the noble was mistaken or was tricked by someone who spread information about the alleged mythical item. He begins to suspect the true intention behind whoever provided this false information. The noble approaches thinking that the potion in Ray's hand is the legendary treasure he had been seeking so much. When the individual demands the delivery of the item, Ray calmly suggests they make a deal instead. The noble becomes completely confused by the proposal and asks what kind of agreement they would have. Ray pretends that mythical items are worth a fortune and says he agrees to sell the vial if he pays the appropriate amount. The annoyed blonde shouts that he doesn't want to hear stories and demands the immediate delivery of the potion. Losing his patience, he threatens to take the item by force and starts preparing to attack. Ray merely stares at him coldly and reminds him that he has already seen what his sword is capable of doing. The noble hesitates and steps back, frightened upon remembering that devastating attack that destroyed the golem. Swallowing his own pride, the blonde agrees to make the deal and asks what price is being charged. Ray points to the chest and demands 25 million per vial totaling 100 million for all the potions. The noble panics at the absurd amount, shouting that such a sum could buy a mansion in the capital. Mocking him, Ray suggests he ask for the money from whoever hired him, provoking him by saying that perhaps his boss isn't even that rich. With his ego bruised, the individual flies into a rage and demands that Ray not make fun of his contractor. He proudly reveals that he works for the Blaze Dragon Adventurer clan and that such an amount is pocket change to them. Upon hearing the name of the Blaze Dragon clan, Ray puts the pieces together and realizes who actually fed the noble with information. The blonde demands to receive the potion first before settling the payment details, and Ray agrees. Without showing any hesitation, Ray simply tosses the potion vial into the air for the noble to catch. Grabbing the vial, the blonde lets out an insane laugh and calls Ray a complete fool. He hugs the potion and runs away desperately, shouting that this is his passport back to nobility and that he won't pay a thing. Calmly, Ray activates a magical item called Pruning Iron Stake to trigger invisible wires scattered throughout the area. Midway through, the noble is suddenly encircled by a net of razor-sharp, lethal wires. Without understanding what is happening, the individual stands frozen as the wires begin to slice his body. Blood squirts brutally across the room's walls as Ray's trap is completed. The noble's dismembered body falls to the floor, ending any chance of survival completely. Watching the scene coldly, Ray makes it clear that he would never return to nobility because he came specifically to execute him. Shortly after, the unconscious warrior begins showing signs of life and slowly wakes up. Ray greets him calmly and asks how his body is feeling after the scare. Still somewhat confused, the warrior starts in surprise upon remembering Carisha and desperately calls out her name. Looking to the side, he notices that the girl is resting peacefully leaning against him. Ray reassures the young man, explaining that she merely fell asleep and that all her injuries have already been healed. Next, Ray invents a story saying that Alexis ended up falling into a trap and didn't survive. The warrior observes the bloodstains on the floor, surprised to learn that the scoundrel is gone. Ray adds that the noble tried to take the chest alone, and the young man accepts the explanation without suspecting a thing. Changing the subject, the warrior praises Ray's absurd power for having defeated the boss golem with a single strike. Maintaining his disguise, Ray smiles modestly and pretends that he just got lucky using a magical item and it worked out. The warrior stares at him with a disdainful look, finding humor in the weak excuse of it being mere luck. He says Ray is overly lucky and was born to be an adventurer, thanking him from the bottom of his heart for the help. At that moment, Carisha begins to stretch and shows signs that she is waking up. The warrior embraces her emotionally upon seeing her awake and well, while Carisha calls him by name. Satisfied with the mission's outcome, Ray suggests with a smile that they all start heading back together. After returning to the city and reporting the mission results at the Adventurers Guild, each goes their own way. Upon parting, Ray shares that the two were actually a couple dating in secret to avoid trouble. He explains that Alexis discovered the secret and used it to blackmail Carisha, keeping the rewards for himself. With the blackmailer gone, Ray hopes that the two can finally live together happily. Walking alone through the city streets under the sunlight, Ray reflects on fulfilling his mission. Back at a large magical structure, he is welcomed with congratulations for his excellent work on the promotion test. At the guild, the attendant receives Ray with a big smile and praises the impressive speed with which he completed the mission. She officially confirms his promotion to C rank and congratulates the young man, who immediately asks what his next job is. The staff member explains that his new assignment will be to accompany Lady Noise on an expedition to a dungeon. She adds that the expedition seems related to a magical artifact known as a mythical item. Ray is surprised, remembering that in his past life, the existence of mythical items was a secret restricted to the military high command. Realizing that someone is leaking confidential information, Ray concludes he needs to accelerate his search for the client before the worst happens. With a dark look, he promises himself to prevent these powerful items from being used for evil. Meanwhile, in the conference room of the Blaze Dragon Adventurer clan, a secret meeting takes place via hologram. One of the clan members complains angrily, calling Alexis useless for failing at such a simple task. A female member comments that at least the boy learned the hard way why he was expelled in the past. Another member asserts that the rumor about the mythical item in that dungeon was false, as expected. A robust warrior declares that even so, The clan's plan cannot suffer delays. He emphasizes that the final objective is to plunge the world into chaos and guarantee the Blaze Dragon clan's supremacy forever. The messenger asks the young man out front if this is acceptable, and the vice captain replies that it certainly is. Vice Captain Terrio of the Knights of Severus smiles, saying he respects the decision coming from the Sword Star. Later, at the frozen entrance of the hidden dungeon Tauros, a new encounter prepares itself. Lady Noise waits with a provocative smile and comments that the young man took his time getting there. Ray emerges enveloped in an intense magical aura as he enters the frozen chamber. He stares at the woman before him, recognizing the S-rank adventurer who occupies the second seat. This is Noise Hamlin, one of the most influential and powerful figures in the guild. Ray approaches and complains about her demanding his presence in the boss room in less than an hour. Noise mocks him and replies that if he had gone all out, he would have arrived much faster. Ray suspects the insinuation and asks why she is so certain about his strength. The woman picks up a small ice crystal from the ground and says he is about to prove her theory. She tosses the crystal into the arena and warns that his test is about to begin right now. The crystal hits the ice structure and triggers an instant magical reaction in the cavern wall. The frozen wall shatters in a massive explosion of mana. A gigantic ice minotaur emerges furious from the wreckage, roaring in front of Ray. The colossal creature charges without hesitation and delivers a heavy blow with its ice weapon. The impact of the attack hits the spot with violence, raising a large amount of dust and ice. Ray activates the magical item creation skill and summons the sacred shield Aegis to block the attack perfectly. He assesses the dungeon boss's strength and realizes that, while he won't take damage, defeating it will take work. The Minotaur attacks again with ferocity, forcing Ray to dodge into the air. While dodging, Ray questions Noise about the rumor that the dungeon contained a mythical item. With an unconcerned smile, Noise admits that it was a lie and just an excuse to lure him there. Ray is surprised to find out he was tricked by her. The ice minotaur crushes the pillar where Ray was standing moments before. Landing with agility, Ray hears Noise ask if he really knows what mythical items are. She stares at him with a deep look, questioning his knowledge regarding these legendary artifacts. Ray realizes that this whole situation is nothing more than a test to measure his true abilities. Noise taunts the young man, saying he will end up gone if he keeps paying attention to her during combat. Ray maintains his calm and prepares to end the confrontation once and for all. He leaps directly toward the gigantic monster advancing against him. Ray summons the Scarlet Whip of Lamentation to restrain the enemy's charges. He binds the Minotaur with the magic whip and summons the sacred sword Excalibur in his other hand. With a precise motion mid-air, Ray unleashes a devastating slash that cuts through the dungeon boss. The ice Minotaur shatters completely, while Ray lands serenely on the ground. Watching from above, Noise smiles impressed and admits she wanted to test his true strength. She concludes that, even defeating the boss so easily, Ray is still hiding his true power. Approaching with firm steps, Noise comments ironically that his strength is bordering on bizarre. Noise continues staring at Ray with an ironic smile and says he looks like a demon pretending to be human. Ray calmly replies that this is quite a peculiar way to describe him, but asks if the description doesn't fit him perfectly. With a penetrating gaze, the woman asserts with conviction that the young man before her is actually not human. Giving no warning whatsoever, Noise manifests a giant phantasmal serpent that advances at ultra-high speed against Ray. The sharp fangs of the magic snake appear inches from the young man's eyes in a lethal charge. However, Ray remains completely motionless and expressionless, receiving the threat without even blinking. Pointing her finger mockingly, Noise says that any normal person would have reacted with terror to an attack like that. Ray merely looks at the serpent beside his face and replies indifferently that he was only impressed by its speed. Noise insists that it's not that, because an ordinary person would at least try to dodge, proving he doesn't react like a normal human. Ray remains silent while the woman continues to lay out her deductions about his past. She reveals that she investigated his steps and found the magical item shop that was recently destroyed in a fire. Ray is slightly surprised when Noise mentions that an old man lived in that place along with his grandson. She adds that unfortunately, both had already passed away, but that she discovered the truth as soon as she examined the bodies. Impressively, Noise reveals she discovered that the old man from the shop was none other than a legendary figure. At that moment, the Ice Minotaur boss rises again at the back of the chamber, roaring in fury. Without moving a muscle, Noise's magic serpent attacks the giant monster and blocks its charge effortlessly. The woman turns to the creature and coldly orders it not to interrupt the conversation she is having. With a single devastating strike, the serpent crushes the Minotaur against the cavern floor. Watching the scene, Ray questions what that whole story about the burned shop has to do with him. Noise smiles mysteriously and says it's all just a hypothesis, but if he is who she thinks he is. She states directly that Ray is the creator of the mythical items, the legendary Riot Burger himself. Noise explains that a young prodigy with S-rank abilities, a heat-immune body, and experienced combat techniques explains everything. Ray listens in silence as the woman continues detailing her theory regarding his return. She says that if a man everyone deemed dead returned to life, he would look exactly like Ray. Noise smiles with satisfaction for having put all the pieces of this puzzle together. Next, she steps closer and asks the decisive question with a provocative look. She demands to know where he really came from and what his true origin is. Ray closes his eyes for a second, reflecting on the woman's question regarding his origin. Flashbacks of his past life begin to surface, showing violent wars and moments from his past. He recalls the image of a smiling baby before tragedies destroyed his former life. The memories bring back dark betrayal and the brutal moment the blades struck his life. He recalls the exact moment he was eliminated and the look of the one who took his life in the past. Opening his eyes in the present, Ray decides to answer Noise's provocation. In a fraction of a second, he unsheathes his magical blade and positions it perfectly against her neck. The Ice Minotaur tries to get up again behind them to attack. Ignoring the creature, Ray begins to channel an enormous amount of magical power. He raises his hand and activates his creation ability at maximum level. Ray summons the sacred hammer Mjolnir, invoking lightning and thunder throughout the frozen chamber. The gigantic divine weapon materializes in midair directly above the dungeon boss. With a calm gesture of his finger, Ray warns that he won't answer the woman's question. The colossal hammer drops with the impact of divine thunder, instantly disintegrating the Minotaur boss into dust. Enveloped in the green glow of lightning, Ray warns that if he answered, he would have to eliminate her too. Walking among the ruins, he declares that if she doesn't want to perish, she will need to follow his rules. Ray points his sword directly at Noise's throat and demands that she shut up and cooperate with him. He promises he won't treat her badly as long as she agrees to work by his side without asking questions. Noise merely smiles without displaying fear and says that threats don't work on her, as he would have taken her head already if he wanted to. She stares at him with confidence and asserts that he needs her help to reach the coveted S rank. Ray looks into her eyes and clarifies that, in truth, what he needs is the information she possesses. Realizing the young man's determination, Noise smiles and immediately comprehends his intention. Ray reveals that the information he wants is about the identity of the person who eliminated him in the past. Ray explains that the one responsible for the hit in his past life was known only as the Client. He details that the individual possessed strength superior to an S-rank adventurer and bore a distinctive mark on his face. Upon hearing the description of the facial mark, Noise shows a slight startle and appears to have recognized the clue. Ray asks if she knows something, but the woman changes the subject and warns that she doesn't hand over information for free. Ray stares at her distrustfully and questions if she really doesn't intend to help him in his search. Noise smiles charmingly and replies that she will help, but makes it clear that she is the one who will give the orders. Approaching the young man, she warns that to get answers, he will need to fulfill every mission he receives. Ray gets annoyed at the woman's blackmail, realizing he will have more work than he imagined. Noise argues that it would be a waste to ignore a power capable of changing the world and insists on the partnership. She explains that she will use Ray to achieve her own goals, while he takes advantage of the missions to track down the culprit. With no other choice, Ray accepts the terms and demands only that she keep her word. Satisfied, Noise confirms the deal and suggests returning to the guild, claiming their time is short. The two leave the hidden dungeon's frozen chamber and head back to the city together. As she walks, Noise reflects in silence that the young man is undoubtedly the legendary Riot Burger. With a wicked smile, she concludes she needs to get the maximum benefit out of that colossal power. Arriving at a luxurious decorated room, Ray looks at the environment and asks where exactly they are. Noise presents her personal office, explaining that all S-rank adventurers receive their own room. Indifferent to the luxury, Ray asks straight to the point what his next task will be. Picking up a file in her hands, Noise asks for calm and reveals she has a very special clue to share. She opens the document containing the file on the Alumni Association of the famous Blaze Dragon Adventurer clan. Upon seeing the clan's name, Ray remembers that the same group provided Alexis with information about the false mythical item. Noise explains that this association is formed by retired adventurers who officially fund the clan's operations. However, she reveals that rumors emerged that the group managed to get its hands on a real mythical item. Ray analyzes the dossier and asks where the official request to investigate this association came from. Noise reveals that the request came from the Royal Army, which is desperate searching for the mythical item stolen from its custody. Ray asks which artifact was taken, but Noise explains that the information is classified and the army intends to recover it alone. She offers the secret mission to Ray, guaranteeing that fulfilling the job will secure his promotion to B rank. With a playful look, Noise winks at the young man and asks if the proposal isn't tempting. Ray admits the offer is good, but makes it clear that reaching B rank is still not enough for his plans. Upon leaving the office, he demands that when he returns, Noise have prepared a mission that will take him straight to S rank. Walking through the hallways, Ray thinks that following the trail of mythical items could lead him directly to his former assassin. He clenches his fist resolutely, promising himself to avenge his past life and prevent the misuse of the artifacts. With a decided look, he concludes he cannot waste time if he wants to reach his ultimate goal. The scene shifts to the main headquarters of the Blaze Dragon Adventurer clan in a bustling tavern. A beer mug is slammed violently onto the table, spilling drink everywhere. Vice leader Hyona rants furiously against the clan's old-timers, complaining that the dungeon received was at least S rank. A gray-haired man laughs out loud hearing his companion's irritated outburst. Rex, an A-rank adventurer of the clan, asks Hyona to calm down and take a sip from her mug. Rex reminds her that it was Hyona who sliced up the dungeon boss, ensuring everyone came out alive and full of rare rewards. Another group member watches the scene and comments that Rex is far too carefree about the situation. Dino, a B-rank adventurer, provokes Rex, saying it was because of that attitude that he was kicked out of his old S-rank party. Annoyed by the provocation, Rex shouts that he left on his own accord to be able to form a team alongside Hyona. Rex looks at Hyona passed out drunk and jokes that he would have thought twice had he known about her vices. Hyona regains her posture, punches the table, and shouts that the focus of the conversation isn't that. Turning serious, she stares at Rex and accuses the clan elders of trying to orchestrate their party's accidental demise. She explains that this sabotage happened solely because they belong to the clan's reformist faction. Dino adds that lately a suspicious man has been frequently entering and leaving the Alumni Association. Hyona stares at her companions with a sharp gaze and says the situation has gone beyond the limit of a mere suspicion. With a dangerous expression, she suggests that if the old men want them dead, they should anticipate it and strike first. Frightened by the radical idea, Rex tries to calm her down, reminding her that despite everything, the elders are still the clan's founders. Dino argues that without being S rank, there is nothing they can do alone, so they will need more allies if they want to act. Hyona questions the idea of seeking allies, and the young man confirms that this is indeed the only possible path. He explains that they need someone flexible, open to new ideas, and with a strong sense of justice, who won't bow to threats. Besides all these virtues, there is one more fundamental requirement. The person needs to be stronger than any S-rank hunter or founding member of the clan. Hyona doubts such a person exists, since current S-ranks only care about their own interests, ignoring the clan. While they debate the lack of qualified people and the risks of recruiting from other clans, a member tries to approach Ray as soon as he enters. Hyona then playfully suggests the idea of creating a strong and cooperative ally themselves from scratch. Dino asks her to take the matter seriously, protesting immediately when she suggests that only weirdos like him follow her. Annoyed, Hyona tells them to stop messing around and focus on finding a real solution. But before she finishes speaking, a thud echoes through the hall as the guy who tried to bother Ray falls, knocked out cold. Without displaying the slightest effort, Ray wipes his hands and calmly comments on how hazing rookies is something universal. Surprised by what they just witnessed, the clan members wonder who that dangerous stranger is. Hyona tries to maintain her composure and warns that if they intend to pick a fight, they should resolve it outside. However, on the inside, she stands completely frozen trying to process the absurd speed of that strike. She had been observing the stranger from the moment he entered, but notes that he unleashed the attack without the slightest prior movement. The speed was so impressive that not even she managed to react before seeing the guy fly far away. The blow struck a vital point with pinpoint precision, incapacitating the target without killing and demonstrating perfect control. With her eyes shining with excitement, Hyona concludes without a shadow of a doubt that the man's strength surpasses that of an S rank. Knowing that almost no one in the hall realized the true magnitude of that movement, Hyona rushes toward the young man. Another irritated guy approaches Ray, ready to start a fight to avenge his fallen companion. He begins ranting, asking if the rookie has any idea where he is stepping. Before the argument escalates, Hyona appears beside Ray and interrupts the conversation immediately. Pointing directly at him with a confident smile, she asks if he came there to join the clan. Ray observes the woman calmly, while waiting to see where that direct approach will lead. Wasting no time, she makes the offer flat out and invites him to be part of her group. The direct proposal takes those present by surprise, while Hyona waits for the strong warrior's response. Ray questions the offer, and she enthusiastically confirms that she was looking for someone with his exact power level. The man in the bandana complains about her giving attention to a stranger, but immediately gets scolded not to interrupt. Ignoring her subordinate's protests, Hyona turns to Ray and demands to know what his decision will be. With a serene smile, Ray apologizes and declines the invitation, explaining that he does not intend to join any permanent group. He knows that, unlike in the past, his goal is not to go adventuring, and the fewer people involved in his plan, the better. Hyona laments the refusal, realizing he fits the solitary hunter style who prefers to act on his own. Even so, she extends her hand and friendly notifies him that he can look for her should he face any trouble. She finally introduces herself as Hyona, the official vice leader of that adventurer clan. Shaking her hand, the young man identifies himself simply as Ray and promises to keep the offer in mind. The Flame Dragon clan was founded 40 years ago by a celebrated group of adventurers. Its founders, Melzen Hilt and Pilsner Hojak, gained worldwide fame after defeating the evil dragon Zerixiel. When the clan was born, countless famous warriors joined the cause, but one in particular stood out among all. This was Dunkel Slain, a legendary warrior known to everyone as the Flame Dragon Hunter. Later that same night, a luxurious carriage pulls up to the entrance of an imposing estate. Out from inside, the vehicle emerges Dunkel Slain himself, now acting as one of the clan's executives. He is greeted by his subordinates while he calmly disembarks under the watchful eyes of the shadows. Watching everything from high atop a roof, Ray recognizes the man as the uncle of Alexis Slyn, the noble he had eliminated. He remembers the financial records he analyzed, showing that a large part of the clan's resources comes from this veteran. Ray suspects that this old man was responsible for leaking the information about the mythical items to Alexis. Moving in silence through the night, Ray follows every step of the target without drawing the slightest attention. By acting openly in public, the veteran is an easy target to investigate, but Ray prefers to remain cautious. The carriage remains parked outside while the old man advances toward the facilities. At the main entrance, an employee respectfully bows to welcome the influential executive. From atop the roof, Ray carefully tracks the place where the old executive just entered. He immediately recognizes the nature and true reputation of that mysterious establishment. It is the VIP area of an underground casino, an exclusive meeting point for influential figures. Inside the room, those involved celebrate the progress of the plan and the preparation of the required mythical item. The hooded individual praises Dunkel's efforts, recognizing the experienced executive's efficiency. With a dark smile, the man states that only one final step remains for completion. While they plan to put the scheme into practice, Ray listens to everything using a magical tool called the Sonic Spiderweb. The tool catches the villains complaining about the current peace, saying that the scarcity of monsters has reduced profits and action. Dunkel admits that only a madman would attempt something so extreme to recover past earnings. The hooded man replies that for their business, the greater the chaos unleashed, the better. Even agreeing with his partner's ambition, Dunkel shows a certain hesitation regarding the scale of the danger. He considers that the creature they intend to bring back is on a completely different threat level. The target of the nefarious plan is none other than Xerxil, the legendary evil dragon. A terrible beast whose awakening would spread destruction and terror throughout the entire region. Dunkel calculates that the dragon's rage will agitate local monsters, generating endless requests and a fortune for his clan. The accomplice agrees, predicting that this tragedy will guide the flame dragon to a new golden age. The two villains get excited about the prospect of dominating the market at the cost of others' suffering. Outside, Ray absorbs the information and reflects on the gravity of the name Xerxil. 40 years ago, it was Ray himself who neutralized that beast using mythical artifacts. At the time, the royal army chose to give full credit for the victory to the adventurers to keep up appearances. In truth, the dragon was sealed beneath the capital, using the mystical artifact Dry Spring of the Desert. In addition to it, the demon summoning flask was used, a tool that drained all moisture from the target. If the effect of this pair of items is inverted, the seal will break and the capital will be consumed by flames. Aware of this impending tragedy, Ray decides that he needs to stop this plan at all costs. The mechanical spider catches a question from the villain regarding the opinion of a third individual in the plot. The accomplice answers that he has full authority in the operation, telling Dunkel not to worry about that mysterious leader. However, the hooded man abruptly notices something wrong and questions if they are being spied on. He notices a presence far too faint to belong to an ordinary human hiding in the room. Before the spy spider can retreat, an energy blade destroys the magical tool on the spot. The fragments of the spying artifact drop destroyed onto the floor of the VIP room. The villain confirms he neutralized a small magical insect that was monitoring their conversation. On the roof, Ray feels the device's signal cut off abruptly. He is surprised by the enemy's perception, since he had reduced the spider's magical signature to a minimum. Realizing that remote tricks will no longer work, he concludes he has no other choice. He stands up under the light of the full moon, ready to act directly to gather more information. Ray infiltrates the main hall of the underground casino, blending into the agitated crowd. Walking among the gaming tables, he reasons about how the villains intend to control the dragon after the revival. He remembers the echo of Memory's artifact and deduces they must plan to use it to contain the beast. Lurking through the place's corridors, Ray searches for clues as to who the boss mentioned in the conversation might be. Putting the pieces together regarding the identity of said leader, he suspects the figure of an old acquaintance. Suddenly, his watchful eye notices suspicious movement just ahead in the hallway. Acting quickly, Ray corners one of the waitresses dressed as a bunny girl against the wall. However, upon staring at the captured woman's face, the young man is caught by surprise. It is Hyona, who recognizes him immediately and demands to know what he is doing in that place. Ray returns the question surprised to see her disguised in that outfit in an underground casino. Embarrassed by the situation, the vice leader tries to disguise her shame at being caught in that disguise. Ray asks if she's working as a waitress in the establishment, making the girl blush and get upset. She asks him to keep quiet about it, swearing she has very serious reasons for being there. In thought, Hyona concludes she cannot reveal to a rookie that she infiltrated to investigate the clan's association. Realizing her hesitation, Ray merely agrees coldly while evaluating the girl's role in that investigation. Ray realizes that, based on the conversation he heard earlier in the hall, the two are probably after the same goal. Facing this coincidence, Ray presses her against the wall and takes the initiative without leaving room for excuses. Looking at her up close, he asks if the invitation made earlier to join a team is still standing. Hyona questions if he refers to the proposal to form a party, and the young man confirms coldly. Ray points out that she went to the trouble of that disguise specifically to find out what the big shots in the back are up to. He reveals that Dunkel is meeting with someone mysterious right now and promises to share the plan if she cooperates. Shocked by the revelation, Hyona demands to know how a newcomer could be aware of something so confidential. Overcoming her astonishment, the vice leader decides to accept the deal, willing to do whatever it takes to expose the executive. She admits she doesn't fully trust him, but says she feels from his demeanor that he is not a bad person. With a mischievous smile, she makes sure to remind him that she is the official vice leader of that clan. Ray merely smiles subtly, finding it advantageous to have an ally with such authority in the organization. Wasting no time, he asks her to cause a big scene in the hall and force the targets out of the private room. Hyona accepts the mission on the spot, stating enthusiastically that she has the perfect plan to unleash chaos. Ray becomes curious upon seeing the object the girl pulls out without the slightest hesitation. She proudly displays a military communicator, revealing she has quite direct resources for the occasion. Seconds later, the royal guard storms the casino, shouting, ordering everyone to keep their hands where they can be seen. The patrons fall into instant panic, unable to believe that royal soldiers discovered the clandestine casino. The commander declares that the law enforcement unit came to investigate reports of illegal gambling at the location. He orders that no one leave their posts, threatening to severely punish anyone who tries to escape. Hidden in the hallway, Ray is impressed to see that she simply called the royal army to create the distraction. Hyona highlights that the casino is surrounded and that the suspects won't have any escape route through the main entrance. Ray serenely disagrees, asserting that criminal figures of this level always prepare a secret emergency exit. And exactly as predicted, Dunkel and the hooded accomplice sprint down a secret underground tunnel. The hooded man gets angry at the police operation, blaming Dunkel's negligence for allowing the army to discover the location. Dunkel curses furiously, guaranteeing he had bribed the inspectors and not understanding where the scheme failed. Facing the risk of capture, the hooded man suggests they split up immediately to ensure escape and regroup at the agreed point. Running alone, the mysterious man suspects the perfect timing of that police raid on that exact day. He remembers the presence from earlier and deduces that the flashy raid is not the subtle style of the Royal Guard when pursuing elite targets. He emerges from the underground tunnels and opens a discreet door in a dark city alley. Convinced that a third force discovered his plans, the villain decides to accelerate his actions. He concludes he needs to execute the plan before the secret is fully exposed to the public. However, while running down the alley, a magical flame suddenly lights up right behind him. The shock is immediate upon seeing fire appear out of nowhere in the middle of the darkness. It is a lit torch, revealing the silhouette of someone waiting for him in the shadows. Without giving any chance to react, Ray unleashes a devastating attack at the speed of light. The violent impact throws the villain backward, forcing him to defend himself as best he can. Skidding across the alley floor, the hooded man grits his teeth to contain the pain of the blow received. Astonished by the extraordinary power of that attack, he notes that the intensity goes beyond the capabilities of an ordinary guard. He stares at Ray in the shadows and demands to know what a warrior of that caliber wants from him. Ray approaches with a cold gaze and declares he only wants answers regarding the secret meeting with Dunkel Sline. The villain finally understands the situation and realizes that man was the presence spying on the previous conversation. Refusing to yield, he draws a hidden blade and replies that he has no reason to give explanations. In a lethal impulse, the man charges at Ray, trying to run him through with a surprise attack. Midway through the charge, the villain activates a special ability to merge completely into the shadows. Using the shadow dive technique, the assassin vanishes into the dark ground to surprise the target. He reappears instantly behind Ray, delivering a point-blank lethal strike. However, Ray's sharp perception tracks the threat rising from the dark in a fraction of a second. With a surgical motion, Ray blocks the dagger in midair and nullifies the sneaky attack without hesitation. Ray recognizes the rarity of the assassination skill, but warns that it won't work against him. Anticipating the movement, Ray uses his magical tool creation to summon the Scarlet Whip of Lamentation, binding the villain with mana chains. The hooded man admits to being impressed by Ray's resistance, deciding to change tactics. He conjures dozens of flying blades, surrounding Ray on all sides in a lethal trap. With a single spinning motion of his whip, Ray shatters all the daggers midair without suffering a scratch. The villain stands incredulous seeing his devastating technique nullified so easily. He notices that Ray is spinning the same mana chain at ultra-high speed to repel every projectile. The assassin realizes that the young man is intentionally demonstrating that attacks of that tier will never affect him. Ray maintains an unwavering stance, staring at the enemy with a calm and dominant gaze. Smiling dark, the man acknowledges he will need to stop hiding his true abilities if he wants to win. He laughs softly while a dense black aura begins to envelop his entire body. He draws two gigantic swords, revealing his definitive fighting style that he hadn't used in a long time. Ray notices the mention of the mysterious leader and evaluates the opponent's true combat stance. The villain charges in fury, aware that he revealed far too valuable trumps. Delivering a devastating strike with both swords, he swears he won't let Ray leave there alive. Even faced with the gale of blades, Ray's eyes follow the trajectory of each attack with extreme precision. Ray dodges by a millimeter, making the colossal strike cut only air. He analyzes that the reach of the heavy swords is considerably larger than it appears. The villain chains together a frantic sequence of slashes, but Ray moves fluidly between the lethal strikes. Thrilled by the fight, the assassin mocks him, asserting that the real fun is only just beginning. Ray recognizes the extraordinary physical strength needed to wield two large, heavy swords simultaneously. He ponders whether to wear down his rival gradually, but decides to end that confrontation as quickly as possible. Ray activates his creation ability and summons the pruning iron stakes, spreading sharp wires throughout the perimeter. The villain realizes he has been surrounded by wires made of pure, concentrated mana and praises the trick. Ray calculates that the enemy will notice the wire's resistance and use Shadow Dive to close the distance. Exactly as predicted, the villain activates Shadow Cloak to pass through the barrier unscathed. Upon emerging from the shadow to attack, he is immediately restrained by a second net of wires positioned at his exit point. Bleeding as his flesh is cut by mana, he panics upon noticing that Ray accurately predicted where he would reappear. With a cold gaze, Ray warns that his rival became predictable by relying too heavily on the same ability. Even trapped and bleeding, the man bites his lips and asserts that he still holds a final trump card. He holds up an ornate golden bell, flaunting the mystical artifact in his hands. The villain triggers the artifact and proudly decrees that he will turn Ray into his obedient pawn. The mental shockwave emitted by the bell triggers memories of the Echo of Memories artifact. The item's power tries to invade Ray's mind to rewrite his consciousness and take control. However, Ray begins to laugh softly, leaving the villain completely confused and unable to understand the reaction. With a smile of relief, Ray reveals that he followed every lead on artifact leaks until reaching that moment. He mentally celebrates having finally found the link he had been searching for so long. He finally found the direct trail that will lead him to the mysterious contractor. The villain tries to maintain his posture and asks if the young man really thinks he has already emerged victorious. He intensifies the bell's energy, promising to bring down his opponent's arrogance. The mystical glow envelops the environment as the brainwashing frequency reaches its peak. Confident in the hypnosis's success, he orders Ray to reveal his true intentions and goals. With serene mockery, Ray replies that magic took zero effect on him. The man falls into total despair, unable to comprehend how someone could resist the mystical artifact. Ray reveals the reason with an imposing look, stating that he himself created that mystical artifact in the past. He recalls when he was at Rit's hideout before infiltrating the organization. On that occasion, the specialist provided rare materials and asked that they be used wisely. Ray used the components to forge a mana disruption device, perfect for nullifying the Echo of Memories. Equipping the wave cancellation tool on his ear, Ray emits opposing frequencies that nullify any hypnosis. The villain stands in absolute shock seeing a legendary mythical item rendered useless by a custom-made invention. Seeing that the situation has slipped completely out of control, he grits his teeth, not knowing how to react. But before Ray can interrogate him, the villain's body begins to dissolve mysteriously into a puddle of shadows. Ray realizes that if any part of the villain's body touches the ground, he can slide into the shadows. The assassin mocks from a distance, admitting that the young man genuinely piqued his interest. He reappears, proposing to raise the confrontation level and use a more creative approach. In a brutal attack, an energy blade destroys the wall of a nearby residential building. The debris crashes down inside the room of an innocent resident, who panics. Ray is outraged upon noticing the presence of civilians and realizes the enemy's perverse intention. The villain smiles sadistically and triggers the mystical bell once more. Declaring the start of his puppet show, he takes mental control of the local civilians. The villain orders his human puppets to advance to immobilize Ray by force. Irritated by the use of innocence, Ray uses mana waves to knock out the civilians without hurting them. The assassin mocks Ray, taunting his reluctance to hurt ordinary people. He mockingly asks if the young man hates seeing innocents suffering because of his actions. Using the puppets to obstruct Ray's vision and movement, the villain prepares an ambush. He attacks furiously behind the hostages, mocking that this weakness will cost the young man his life. Ray realizes that if he dodges the strike, the blade will eliminate the civilians right behind him. Without hesitation, Ray uses his own body as a shield to absorb the impact and protect the hostages. The heavy blade strikes Ray head-on, generating an energy explosion at the site. The devastating impact destroys the surrounding ground and raises a dense curtain of dust. The villain finds the sensation of the thrust strange, noticing that the blade didn't penetrate real flesh. Stepping out of the rubble without a single serious scratch, Ray comments that his body is simply tougher than normal. Impressed with Ray's durability, the villain sends more puppets to test his limits. The mind-controlled civilians charge frantically at the young man in a chaotic attack. Tired of those cowardly tricks, Ray decides to put a definitive end to the manipulation of innocence. He creates the silent perfume tool, releasing a magical mist that makes all civilians fall asleep on the spot. The assassin is stunned to see all his puppets drop off to sleep smoothly on the ground without suffering damage. Taking advantage of the gap, Ray appears before the villain in the blink of an eye and strikes him hard. Leaving no room for escape, Ray fires mana chains to immobilize his opponent. The villain stands completely bound and unable to make any movement or escape through the shadows. Ray takes the golden bell from his rival's hands and decrees that the puppet show is over. Disarmed and cornered, the villain watches helplessly as Ray takes the floor to interrogate him. With a terrifying gaze, Ray demands to know who the master behind the pursuit of the mythical artifacts is. Ray activates the bell itself against the villain, forcing his mind to crumble under the domination magic. Powerless to resist, the assassin's consciousness yields entirely to the relic's influence. In a trance, the villain reveals that the main goal of the organization is to establish anarchy and chaos. He confesses that they intend to use the power of the mythical artifacts to spread destruction across the continent. The group's ultimate goal is to trigger a full-scale war across the entire world. Ray is surprised to discover that the resurrection of Zarek's seal was only a small part of the master plan. The prisoner admits they used the greedy members of the Flame Dragon clan to cover their tracks. Ray asks if his organization was the one responsible for stealing the mythical artifact from the royal army's hands. With a completely vacant gaze, the assassin confirms the suspicion without hesitation. He reveals that the demon summoning flask has already been transported to the correct location. The stolen artifact has already been positioned exactly where the evil dragon is sealed. The villain warns that the resurrection will begin the moment the activation signal is sent. Ray recalls that he used the pair of artifacts in the past to simultaneously contain the beast's body and mana. He knows that breaking only half of the seal will cause a terribly disastrous reaction. If only one item is violated, the dragon will awaken incomplete and enter an uncontrollable frenzy. Disgusted by such madness, Ray rants against the villain, who celebrates the ruin in the name of his master. The fanatic demonstrates that he does not care about the destruction of the capital as long as his goal is achieved. Seeing the subject's hysterical laughter, Ray notes the absurd level of fanaticism in that sect. Elsewhere in the city, Dunkel Sline believes he has thrown everyone off his trail and escaped safely. Yuna confronts Dunkel in the middle of the street and demands that he stop his plans this instant. Pointing her sword firmly, she warns that she has already uncovered the entire conspiracy and tells the man to surrender without resisting. The individual merely mocks the girl, calling her a rookie and saying she understands nothing of the situation. He tries to justify himself by claiming that his success means the prosperity of the clan itself and the good of everyone. But his demeanor abruptly shifts to an insane expression, warning in a threatening tone for her not to cross his path. Immediately after, he triggers the mechanism of a trap with his own hands. A huge explosion occurs right behind, catching the young warrior completely off guard. Upon noticing the intensity of the energy, the girl realizes that it is no ordinary bomb. The villain mocks her, saying she won't have the luxury of worrying about him anymore, as gigantic claws rise from the ground. The situation rapidly spirals out of control as the monster threatens to turn the entire capital into a sea of fire. The mystical beast roars furiously, accumulating an absurd amount of magic in its mouth. Hyuna panics in the face of the colossal threat, while the villain laughs non-stop in the background. Except before the monster attacks, an overwhelming magical glow fills the skies and takes everyone by surprise. It is protagonist Ray, activating his item creation ability to summon the powerful Meteor Buster Cannon. He appears in battle and states to his opponent that he has many questions, but that the interrogation will have to wait. Without breaking rhythm, the young man prepares his magic cards and decides that the priority is defeating the dragon. The beast reacts with total fury, spewing fire everywhere after being struck. Positioned on top of a building, Ray observes the gigantic monster spreading chaos through the city. Keeping calm amid the destruction, he coldly analyzes the enemy's weak points. The young man notices that the creature's body is unstable and made of pure fluid energy. With that, he notes that the beast is still in an incomplete state and can barely maintain its own form. Because it was forced into a fragile vessel, an immense amount of magical power is overflowing without control. Hyuna comes running up, and Ray asks immediately what happened to Dunkel. The girl replies that she beat the guy up and left him tied up completely, ensuring he won't wake up anytime soon. Surprised by the power of that previous blast, she asks if it was really the young man who executed such a strong strike. Ray confirms and explains that he used highly concentrated mana ammunition with the intention of decapitating the beast. However, he notes that the excess energy overflowing from the monster ended up functioning as a protective barrier. Hyuna stands shocked at the revelation, admitting she had never seen anything like it before. Suddenly, the beast begins charging its power in its throat once again and prepares to attack. A devastating beam strikes the urban area, exploding buildings and sweeping the entire street. The impact generates a brutal wave of destruction that sends everything around flying into the air. Seeing that trail of chaos, the girl freezes, totally horrified at the force of the strike. With just one charge, the dragon carved a gigantic incandescent crater in the middle of the district. Seeing the danger approaching, Ray pulls Hyuna at the last instant before she gets hit. He leaps through the skies, carrying his companion in his arms to escape the danger zone. The young man lands safely on another roof and tells the girl to regain her focus immediately. He warns that any distraction in front of a monster of that tier will result in their demise. Down below, the populace panics completely and runs aimlessly to save their lives. The dragon continues advancing between the buildings, spreading panic wherever it passes. Smoke and fire take over the streets while destruction advances without stopping. On a distant balcony, a mysterious figure watches the entire scene in absolute silence. The long-haired man displays no concern whatsoever and merely tracks the chaos with his gaze. Meanwhile, people cry in terror seeing structures collapse around them. Watching the flames consume the buildings, Hyuna laments the destruction of the city. Indignant, she asks why the royal army and the Order of Knights haven't shown up yet to contain the monster. Ray explains that large organizations always take time to mobilize in an emergency of this size. The girl is shocked when she realizes he intends to face the aberration with only her help. The young man reveals that the Alumni Association was just one piece, and that the true mastermind behind it all is still hidden, making it impossible to wait for reinforcements. Looking directly at her, he states that the only person he can truly trust at that moment is her. Faced with such firmness, Hyuna is completely surprised and left without a reaction in the middle of the emergency. Along the path, several residents run terrified, while a mother tries to protect her son fallen on the ground. The dragon rises right behind the victims, accumulating a devastating fireball in its mouth to destroy them. In total despair, the woman hugs the child and cries out for help to the heavens. Without hesitating for a second, Hyuna charges at ultra-high speed to interpose herself between the beast and the civilians. The girl activates her special skill, making her sword glow with living flames. She unleashes the Leviathan technique with full force, slicing through the air to intercept the monster's attack. Taking advantage of the gap, Hyuna tells the residents to flee immediately, and the mother thanks her with tears in her eyes as she runs. Ray approaches the area walking with total serenity while the survivors evacuate the location. Looking at the young man, Hyuna accepts reality and acknowledges that they have no choice but to fight. With her spirit renewed, she wields her sword and declares herself ready to subdue the evil dragon. The girl asks what the plan will be, aware that ordinary attacks don't even make the creature flinch. Ray looks at her and reminds her that, as a specialist in hunting dragons, she should know the traditional methods. Hyuna explains that the standard procedure is to cut off the monster's wings or tail to limit its mobility. She adds that the next step would be hitting the throat to contain the roars, but that none of that works against a magical barrier. Listening to the explanation, the young man shows a glowing ring on his hand and suggests using that barrier to their advantage. He activates his creation skill to manifest the magical item called the circular ring. Ray explains that the accessory functions as a mana stimulant, extracting maximum power from the user. Next, he instructs Hyuna to act as bait against the monster until his preparation is complete. The dragon resumes firing pitiless blasts of fire, destroying the structure of the surrounding streets. Strengthened by the item, Hyuna leaps into action using her dance of flaming blades. The warrior is impressed by the power jump, realizing her strength increased drastically without depleting her energy. Even enthusiastic, she knows this temporary advantage won't last long if the battle drags on. Suddenly, the giant beast aims directly at her and prepares a point-blank energy shot. Seeing the blinding light in front of her, the girl realizes the impending danger and fears the worst. The monster fires a devastating beam that explodes with extreme violence at the sight. In the very last millisecond, Ray dashes forward, enveloped in an intense blue magic glow. He executes a risky maneuver in the air while his companion tracks his movements. Hyuna asks what he intends to do to take advantage of the enemy's magical barrier. The young man answers that the first objective of the plan is to push the creature away, outside the city. And to achieve that, he intends to hurl the dragon far away along with its own barrier. He explains that, although the attacks didn't cause direct damage, the combat served for him to learn a crucial detail. The young man noticed that the monster's force field cannot fully absorb the physical impact of the strikes. The girl understands the reasoning, but questions how to move such a gigantic body. She asks surprised what method he will use to push a mass of that size. Without leaving time for talk, the dragon accumulates multiple spheres of fire in its mouth and prepares a rain of attacks. The beast fires blasts in sequence, but Ray skillfully dodges by leaping amidst the explosions. As he descends at speed, the young man confidently asserts that the logic of the strategy is quite simple. He compares the situation to a bird trapped in an indestructible cage. Maneuvering in the air right in front of the gigantic claws, the young man prepares his artifact for the exact moment. The beast roars, making the ground shake while the buildings around continue to collapse. The young man concludes his thought, saying that if the bird doesn't move, one simply moves the entire cage. Accumulating a monstrous amount of kinetic force and mana, Ray prepares a devastating charge. With a cry of determination, he channels all power into the decisive strike. The raw impact strikes the dragon's barrier head-on, generating a colossal shockwave. The impact's force is so absurd that it sends the giant dragon flying straight toward the heavens. From high above the capital, it is possible to see the beam of energy launching the beast up above the clouds. Hyuna watches the scene from below completely shocked, unable to believe what just happened. Taking advantage of the momentum, Ray takes off toward the heights, following the beast's trajectory. In mid-air, he once again activates his magical item creation ability on a maximum scale. A gigantic floating castle manifests in the skies, creating a monumental fortress for the final phase of the battle. Dragon's Arcsail ends up right on top of the floating fortress newly created by Ray. Positioned under the moonlight, the young man observes the creature and declares that place will be the final stage of the battle. That puppet body belonging to the mythical item Riot Burger possesses 10 times more magical power than in his prime. When having this energy amplified by the circular ring and condensed into a single point, the result is extraordinary. The strike generated was strong enough to throw even a legendary beast far away. However, Ray notes that his own arm was completely burned and damaged by the excess force. Observing the damaged magical circuits on his limb, he realizes the flaw behind that attack. Magical circuits function like blood vessels, being responsible for circulating mana throughout the body. Since the circular ring amplified the magic abruptly, the vessel's circulation channel could not withstand the pressure. Human bodies possess a natural limiter in the brain for self-protection, but that puppet lacks that safety latch, easily exceeding capacity. Even with his arm injured, the young man analyzes the situation coldly and concludes there is still room to upgrade the artifact. Down below, Hyuna observes the immense structure hovering in the skies and asks herself indignantly who that individual really is. Upon seeing Ray approach with his arm raw, the girl sighs relieved, but immediately gets scared by his injury. The young man minimizes the situation with total calm, saying that it was just a small side effect of the strike. Seeing the burn blisters, the warrior counters that it wasn't minor, but Ray ends the topic and asks her to accompany him to the fortress. The two look together at the suspended castle and confirm they will go up immediately to resolve the issue. The objective of the combat at the top of the clouds is single, to subdue the dangerous dragon Zarksail once and for all. The mystical beast roars with uncontrollable fury upon finding itself trapped on the elevated terrain. Reaching the upper platform, the duo comes face to face with the monster enveloped in flames. Hyuna notes that the beast seems much more agitated than before, and Ray mockingly says it just got surprised by being thrown. Wasting no time, Zarksail fires a violent barrage of fireballs in the direction of the intruders. Ray grabs Hyuna and runs fast through the platform's water to escape the rain of incandescent projectiles. While dodging the impacts, the girl complains about the enemy's increased rage, but the young man merely answers that they just need to keep dodging. Seeing the dragon roar non-stop, Hyuna asks angrily how they will manage to defeat an aberration like that. Keeping calm, Ray explains that the monster's physical structure doesn't differ from common dragons, the magical barrier being its only distinct feature. Hearing this, the girl reasons that if the anatomy is the same, they can create an opening when the beast goes to use its fire breath. At the base of a dragon's throat exists a fire pouch where mana concentrates intensely during the breath release. Hidden behind a stone structure, Hyuna deduces what happens when energy gathers at that specific point. She realizes that when mana focuses on the throat, the protective barrier covering the rest of the body thins out. Ray agrees and explains that he will use a magical tool to locate the exact weak point as soon as the mana shifts. The girl understands the strategy, but questions how he intends to pierce the enemy's defense with his arm disabled. The young man answers promptly that he won't be the one responsible for undoing the beast's shield. Hyuna gets startled by the statement and says she could never generate the absurd firepower he usually uses. However, Ray looks firmly at her and reminds her that the warrior holds a hidden special ability. He smiles and mentions that she possesses a trump card so destructive it would be impossible to use inside the city. The girl is left completely perplexed upon realizing that he already knew about her greatest secret. Meanwhile, the dragon strikes the surrounding structure with its tail, sending stones and sparks flying everywhere. Dodging the debris, Hyuna vents that he was investigating her life, but admits her power doesn't even compare to his. Ray guarantees there is no problem, as he will use the circular ring to extract maximum potential from her and her magical blade. With the ring on her finger and her sword gleaming with fire, the young woman laughs surprised and asks who he really is to know so much about her weapon. The young man merely gives an enigmatic smile and modestly replies that he is just a beginner adventurer, knowledgeable about items. Ending the conversation, Ray points at the advancing dragon and warns that the hour for the final battle has begun. Zarksail roars with built-up rage and prepares a large amount of fire to incinerate the duo. A massive explosion consumes the scene, destroying the floor and throwing large rocks into the air. Using magical shields as a platform to leap into the air, Ray dodges with extreme agility. From above, he shouts his companion's name for her to initiate the combined maneuver. Stepping firmly on the aquatic surface, Hyuna answers in the same instant that she already understood the order. She dashes forward with her flaming sword, complaining in a good-humored tone about having to serve as bait again. Zarksail turns its massive head toward the girl, roaring fiercely to devour her. Channeling the ring's power, Hyuna activates the Fire Legs technique to boost her attack with full speed. Hyuna advances at ultra-high speed and fires the Hinen Flamme technique straight at the creature. The girl projects her body forward with pure resolve, channeling all the fire into her blade. The precise strike hits the base of the dragon's throat head-on, right in the fire pouch region. The beast's throat explodes into incandescent sparks, and the warrior shouts Rei's name so he acts fast. Concentrating blue magical energy in his hands, the young man prepares to execute his part of the plan. He activates the creation skill to summon the sonar detection wave, capable of visualizing the enemy's mana flow. Feeling the synergy of teamwork, Rei remembers with nostalgia his former comrades Sarah and Leto. Recalling the trust they placed in one another, the young man's gaze fills with determination. He knows he needs to measure up to the person risking her life by his side. Meanwhile, Zarksail accumulates flames in its mouth and prepares to incinerate the young man with another devastating breath. Seeing the beast aim in his direction, Hyuna panics, trying to warn him about the danger. The dragon fires an overwhelming blast of fire, exploding the entire area around Rei. Oblivious to the attack, the diamond-shaped artifact hovers above the monster and begins scanning the magical structure. Emerging from the middle of the flames without a single scratch, the young man coldly observes the creature. Pointing his hand with the ring, Rei demands that the sonar reveal the hidden flaw in the enemy's defense. The sonar projection maps Zarksail's thermal map, showing the energy flowing through the monster's body. The beast roars, trying to maintain its attack, but the scanning continues without interruptions. The exact weak point in the dragon's throat is finally located and highlighted by the artifact. Wasting no time, Hyuna steps forward and activates her Liavatin fire sword at maximum power to strike the target. The concentrated blow pierces the opening in the defense, causing the beast's entire magical barrier to shatter. A wave of scorching heat spreads across the battlefield after the monster's shield crumbles. Observing the scene, Rei mentally recognizes that this is the greatest dragon subjugation secret. Enveloped in an aura of golden flames, Hyuna Carmine prepares the final movement of her secret technique. She releases the devastating Firebird, a colossal beam of light and flames that cuts through the dragon from end to end. The impact generates a scalding whirlwind that consumes the beast's body with extreme violence. Landing with her body worn out by the blow's force, the girl celebrates thinking she won the battle. However, a red blast explodes from the middle of the smoke, showing that the beast still holds on. Hyuna freezes in shock upon seeing that the dragon survived her most powerful attack. Even severely burned and without magical defense, Zarksail roars with blind rage ready to counterattack. Rei takes a step forward with total composure, noting that the annoying barrier finally vanished. The young man activates divine-level magical item creation to summon the monumental sacred sword Excalibur. Looking at his companion, the young man warns that now it's his turn to finish the fight. The entire floating fortress shines with a radiant divine light that illuminates the night sky. A sacred blade of colossal proportions materializes over the clouds and drops straight toward the beast. Zarksail looks up terrified upon seeing the giant sword falling over its head. Side by side, the duo tracks the divine artifact's impressive descent. The sacred sword Excalibur impales the dragon with devastating force, generating a blinding flash in the fortress. Hyuna is impressed to see the absurd scale of power the young man is capable of manifesting. The blade's gigantic tip pierces through the monster and embeds itself deeply into the platform's structure. With a cold and precise hand gesture, Rei commands the final strike to slice the enemy. A whirlwind of pure sacred mana cuts through the creature's body relentlessly. The young man mocks the beast, saying he reinforced Excalibur, and that this must be the first time it sees a sword bigger than itself. He taunts, asserting that the monster no longer has the rigid carapace of its prime, nor the capacity to fly. Pointing his finger with contempt, Rei declares that without the magical barrier to protect it, the legendary dragon is nothing more than a simple lizard. The colossal blade crushes and cuts Zarksail in half with a definitive impact. The monster's skull and structure begin to disintegrate into ashes under the sacred light. The dragon's gigantic body dissolves into a dark mass that dissipates in the air. The beast's remains melt completely over the castle floor until absolutely nothing is left. The smoke clears, revealing Rei and Hyuna victorious at the top of the floating fortress. Under the full moon's glow, the subjugation of the fearsome evil dragon Zarksail is deemed complete. That same night, the movement through the city streets begins to give way to a tense silence. Bound and surrendered, Dunkel screams in despair, unable to accept that the legendary dragon Zarksail was defeated. The man rants incredulously upon learning that only the two young people defeated the beast, making Hyuna irritated at the excessive noise. Rei advances with total coldness and asserts he has definitive proof of the victory to show to the authorities present. The public order guards observe attentively as the young man channels mana into the air to open a portal. Using the spatiotemporal repository ability to access an alternate space, the young man pulls out the beast's remains. Upon seeing part of the dragon's body fallen on the ground, the villain suffers a mental collapse, unable to process the failure of his plan. Hyuna takes a step forward, ironically lamenting that the individual's grand conspiracy ended in that manner. Flanked by the guards, the warrior warns that his custody will be handed over to the public order unit and that he will rot in a cold cell. She reinforces that he will pay for all his crimes along with the other traitorous members of the Alumni Association. Consumed by anger and despair, Dunkel glares at the girl with pure hatred while being restrained by the officers. The man struggles furiously trying to escape, but the guards push him impatiently, telling him to keep walking. The villain rants that he is Dunkel slain and demands to be released, making Hyuna note that he hasn't learned his lesson. Rei merely observes the scene and reflects that villains always justify their actions without ever looking at their own mistakes. The girl turns to the young man and thanks him from the bottom of her heart for helping resolve the disaster caused by her clan. The young man returns the compliment, stating that the dragon's barrier would never have been destroyed without the devastating firepower she unleashed. Hyuna looks at the ring on her hand and acknowledges that the feat was only possible thanks to the magical artifact he handed her. Returning the ring to her companion, the warrior expresses her fascination with the incredible power magical tools possess. Taking the item back, Rei considers that no matter how powerful an artifact is, the final result always depends on who uses it. He reflects that many magical tools are useful, but precisely for that reason run the permanent risk of being used for evil. Sitting atop a roof observing the city, the duo contemplates the trail of destruction left throughout that night. Seeing rescuers helping victims in the streets, the young man laments the tragedy and thinks of the urgent need to act. With a serious look, Rei concludes to himself that he needs to recover the mythical item as fast as possible to prevent further bloodshed. The young man then asks Hyuna about the fate of the mysterious man she was pursuing before the battle. The girl stands shocked and screams in surprise upon discovering that the suspect managed to escape, making the young man ask for calm over the shouting. Rei points to the cut magic wires on the ground and explains that he managed to capture him, but the individual vanished without a trace. Trying to console him, Hyuna says they were busy facing the dragon, and that it would be impossible to prevent the escape in that chaos. However, the young man analyzes the scene closely and realizes that prisoner could never escape on his own. He recalls that he used spells to seal the man's abilities, and that the restraint wires could not be broken by an ordinary person. Examining the perfect cut on the magic lines, Rei notes with absolute certainty that they were severed by an extremely sharp sword. He remembers the long-haired figure and concludes that very few people in the realm possess the skill required for such a feat. Hyuna suggests they meet with the royal army to report the dragon's fall, but the young man declines on the spot. The young man asserts he will pursue the fugitive immediately to reach the true mastermind before new victims emerge. The girl recognizes the gravity of the situation, pointing out that the mastermind must be someone influential to use the Alumni Association. Rei asks her to handle the official reports with the army, and Hyuna readily accepts, making herself available to help. With a confident smile, the warrior reminds the young man that they are already teammates and that he can count on her. The young man observes the girl's determination in silence, feeling a familiar warmth in his chest. That attitude makes him recall the sense of safety and camaraderie he felt alongside his former party allies. Smiling genuinely for the first time in a long while, Rei thanks the girl for bringing back that hope. The warrior gets slightly embarrassed by the sudden smile and asks what he is laughing at, but the young man lightly changes the subject. Later, the story shifts to Leto's underground workshop hideout. Carrying a tea tray, Leto comments in a provocative tone that the young man put on quite an extravagant show in the capital. Sitting at the location, Ray justifies that he needed to protect the city, although his ally jabs saying that summoning a fortress was an exaggeration. Leto warns that former members of the strike force will recognize his style and that discovering Riot Burger is alive will bring serious trouble. The ally questions if said conspiracy client knew the young man from his active service days, and Ray nods in confirmation. The young man adds that, after the mess on that scale, they cannot afford the luxury of acting calmly. Handling a leather strap mysteriously, the young man asserts it will even be convenient if the enemies try direct contact. With a shrewd smile, Ray guarantees he will use that unwanted attention to his favor to lure the villains into a trap. Crossing his arms, Leto displays skepticism and reminds him that, despite the new body, that is an opponent against whom he has already lost in the past. Pointing at the young man's injured arm, the ally asks how he intends to fight in that state, but Ray merely looks at the burn serenely. Wasting no time, he makes it completely clear that there is no problem at all and guarantees he won't just repair the arm, but will make a complete upgrade. The statement leaves the craftsman completely in shock, as the original body used extremely rare materials and an upgrade would require something even superior. With a confident smile, he explains he obtained the perfect materials to perform this enhancement. Next, he reveals the remains of the fearsome dragon he had recently defeated. They are valuable parts extracted from Zarksal, known as the most nefarious dragon of all. He then hands over a sealed letter to ensure the negotiation goes as smoothly as possible. He explains he already spoke with the Magic Stone shop and that presenting the recommendation will be enough to avoid complications, leaving Leto relieved. As he walks toward the room's exit, he says goodbye, calling his companion Riot. Before he crosses the door, Leto makes sure to ask him to be very careful. With a calm demeanor, he merely answers that he will stay alert and goes on his way. After all, he knows that the remains of the evil dragon Zarksale are the best existing material to replace and strengthen his lost arm. However, to extract the true potential of this power, a magic stone of ultra-high compatibility is required. For that reason, he asked Leto to use his connections and introduce him to a local merchant, bringing him to that shop. Except upon arriving at the establishment, he runs right into a heated argument and someone pounding on the counter. A young man with sharp teeth begs to borrow an animal for a moment, while the shop owner tells him to get out of his sight. Not wanting to waste time, the protagonist politely intervenes to stop the fight and be served. He explains he was recommended by the head of the Brown Trading Company and assumes the man is already aware of the request. Upon recognizing the letter, the merchant's attitude changes on the spot, and he confirms he knows exactly what needs to be done. The seller presents the magic cat, Elikunoa, a small creature contained inside a cage. He reveals that the animal spat out one magic stone per day of varying sizes and asks to return it as soon as he gets a suitable stone. The owner warns about the little animal's playful behavior and asks for care, while the young man agrees without hesitating. Suddenly, the spiky-haired boy throws himself in their direction, demanding that they wait a bit. The protagonist merely looks to the side coldly and asks what he wants. The individual rants furiously, claiming he had seen that magic cat first. Faced with that senseless complaint, the young man remains silent while the merchant shows pure embarrassment in the background. When the boy says that this is an extremely rare species that lives in the northern mountains, the protagonist ignores his desperation and notifies him that he made a reservation. Without giving up, the young man begs to at least give a single pet to the creature. The protagonist sighs internally, seeing how that individual doesn't know when to give up. Except before he can react, a sudden glow emerges and catches him totally by surprise. In the blink of an eye, the strange boy has already managed to take the cat and is hugging the little animal with the greatest happiness in the world. Noticing the skill required to steal the cage in a millisecond, he realizes on the spot that the boy is no ordinary person. But the joy is short-lived, because the magic cat doesn't like the hug at all and begins to get visibly annoyed. In an instant, the creature releases a brutal electrical shock that electrocutes the boy without mercy. Taking advantage of the distraction, the feline leaps to the ground and sprints off toward the street. The protagonist watches shocked, realizing that the beast just escaped from the establishment. At that moment, a dark and frightening aura takes over the venue behind them. Furious, the merchant warns that if the cat truly escapes, the compensation fee for the loss will be 100 million. Facing such an absurd debt, the two run immediately into the city's busy street. The young man dashes at high speed between the stalls so as not to lose sight of the creature. Next, he points the direction where the small beast leaped over the buildings. The boy with sharp teeth launches himself into the air right behind, shouting that he already knows where the cat went. Except as soon as he gets close, he receives a precise swipe right in the middle of his face. The impact knocks the boy to the ground with violence, while the feline lands peacefully on the roof. Seeing the damage, the protagonist approaches and asks if he is still intact, receiving a weak murmur in response. To make matters worse, the small feline begins to peck at their faces from up high. As the boy stands up, the young man explains that the natural habitat of this species is steep cliffs, guaranteeing far superior agility. Without hesitating for a second, the boy builds up momentum again to try and capture the beast. In an agile movement, he projects himself to the top of the structure to corner the little animal. The boy's speed is so impressive that even the protagonist himself is surprised watching the scene. However, as soon as he reaches out his hand, the cat fires another devastating electric shock and leaves the boy charred in the air once more. The protagonist analyzes the situation and realizes that the animal releases an electrical discharge whenever it senses any kind of danger. Dan asks how they will catch it, noting that the cat doesn't see normally, but senses the environment through magical power waves. Dan suggests that if they cause magical motion sickness in the creature, it will drop all at once, making the young man reflect on the idea. Faced with this, the protagonist activates his creation ability to project an item capable of neutralizing energy waves. Dan asks if that is a magical tool, and he confirms, explaining that the original function was to cancel magical impulses. However, by narrowing the area of effect and inverting the artifact's function, he alters the tool's property completely. A magical shockwave spreads through the location in moments, catching the small feline totally off guard. Feeling the severe dizziness caused by the magical alteration in the environment, the creature gets disoriented immediately. Seeing the result, Dan gets excited upon realizing the plan worked with perfect efficiency. Without hesitation, he steps forward and grabs the dizzy animal before it hits the ground. With a big smile on his face, he celebrates the successful capture of the magic cat. The protagonist merely observes the boy's excitement with a light, satisfied smile. With the feline properly put away in the covered cage, Dan apologizes for having caused the animal's escape at the beginning. The protagonist guarantees there is no reason for concern, since they managed to recover the creature safely. Dan is impressed with the tool used and asks curiously where he bought such an incredible item. He answers mysteriously that this is a secret, leaving the boy a bit disappointed. Dan understands the situation, admitting that no one would want to spread details about a powerful artifact, and the young man thanks him for the understanding. The boy remembers to introduce himself properly and says his name is Dan, asking what the young man's name is. Without hesitation, he answers, presenting himself simply as Ray. Dan compliments the name and promises to buy a meal at their next meeting, to which Ray replies he will be looking forward to it. Right after, the boy waves in a friendly manner and says goodbye, walking down the busy street. Watching the boy's departure, Ray reflects on how he was away from the common world for so long. He acknowledges that there are truly talented young people in the world, just like Hyuna and Dan. He remembers the real Ray and thinks about how things would be if the original boy were still alive. Suddenly, his expression turns cold and relentless. He vows that the man responsible for destroying that young man's future is unforgivable and promises to track him down wherever he may be. Sensing the frightening bloodlust overflowing from the young man, even the magic cat trembles in fear inside the cage. With a lethal look, Ray reinforces his promise to carry out his vengeance pitilessly. In a grand hall elsewhere, a man concludes the report of recent events before his superior. The superior listens to everything attentively and answers serenely. However, the subordinate trembles in pure terror upon feeling the terrifying pressure in the air. The man known as Swordstar scolds the subordinate for using a mythical item without authorization and still failing. Enveloped in a frightening aura, he asks coldly if the man lost his love for his own life. Terrified, the subordinate begs and tries to apologize desperately to save his own skin. Suddenly, the hall doors burst open violently, and someone enters announcing their arrival in a completely relaxed manner. It is Dan, who finds the room's tension strange and jokes with his superior, saying he is already far too scary with that serious face. Revealed as the first knight of the Order of Cephals, Dan Kraft suggests with a provocative smile that everyone should calm down. The story shifts to an isolated fortress on an island at night, where luxurious ships dock guests. At the location, Ray appears dressed in formal attire and a feline mask, finding the accessory completely ridiculous. Even bothered by the look, he maintains flawless posture while observing the busy environment. He recognizes there is nothing to be done, as that masked dress code is the event's rule. Various nobles and influential figures walk masked through the hall, keeping their identities secret. On that full moon night, the isolated island gathers high-ranking officials and important personalities for a grand event. It is a clandestine auction where tens of millions of coins change hands in a few hours for valuable relics. Knowing that the stolen mythical item will be auctioned, Ray's objective is to recover the object and discover who the contractor behind the theft is. He focuses entirely on this decisive mission while staring at the entrance of the Grand Palace. Days prior, Ray's companion observed astonished upon seeing that his arm was already completely regenerated. He answers indifferently while analyzing some important documents. He explains internally that, by combining the dragon's remains with the dark thunder magic stone, he created a far more powerful arm. Upon testing the new prosthesis's devastating strength, he created a giant crater that exceeded even his own expectations. Ray recognizes that his new arm will be a great trump card in future battles and shifts the subject to get details about the next request. The woman agrees and explains that the previous incident exposed the entire alumni association of the Hellfire Dragon. However, one of the important members of the group, named Merson Hilt, managed to escape from the authorities. She reveals that the fugitive put the mythical item known as the Demon Summoning Gourd up for sale at a clandestine auction to fund her escape. Upon hearing about the illegal auction, the woman explains that everything from rare objects to human lives is traded there far from the public market. Ray asks if the objective is to capture Merzan and recover the gourd, but the woman warns that the mission involves something more. She reveals she found the name of a very specific person on the auction's attendance list. It was the exact same mysterious individual who had faced Ray on that turbulent night. The revelation leaves the young man surprised to learn he will reunite with that opponent. She tells that she analyzed the subject's fighting style, described in the report, and researched in the confidential reading room until discovering his true identity. He is Terrio Dieu, none other than the vice commander of the Knights of Sebrus. Ray remembers the man's declaration about starting a new war and finds it strange why a royal knight would plan something like that. The woman makes it clear that discovering the true intentions behind those acts is part of his mission. He concludes that the knight's desire for war must not be driven solely by financial interest. Since the order is funded by church donations, a conflict would only lose followers, leaving no logical reason to start a war for money. This makes him realize that the only reason for such an attitude could only be orders coming directly from the mysterious contractor. As he prepares to leave, a magic serpent rises on his shoulder, asking him to wait. The woman complains about his impatience and warns that the conversation hasn't finished. She reminds him of the previous promise to prepare a request capable of promoting him directly to S rank. She then reveals that to fulfill the mission requirements, he will need to partner with the newly arrived young man. Looking at the young boy, Ray recognizes him on the spot. It is Gaia, the former A rank, who greets him provocatively, calling him Big Brother. With a mocking smile, Gaia displays his new title of S rank hunter, occupying the 12th position in the ranking. Ray remembers when they met at the Dark Guild exam, where the boy seemed inexperienced and impulsive. However, his presence now is overwhelming, showing that he went through brutal battles and survived a true massacre. The woman explains the conditions to rank up, saying that the first is to complete a mission accompanied by an active S rank, and the second requirement is to receive a formal recommendation from that same S rank partner at the end of the mission. Gaia approaches with a predatory look, making it clear that if he doesn't recognize his abilities, Ray will never rise in class. He challenges the young man to prove his true worth if he wants to skip A rank and go straight to the top. He even adds in a threatening tone that if the young man gets in his way during the process, he won't hesitate to eliminate him. Mocking him, the young man tells him to take it easy and be sure that he understood the message. Although bothered by having a babysitter on the mission, Ray knows this is his perfect opportunity to get close to the contractor. With a calm mind, he decides he will simply use Gaia's strength to his advantage during the operation. Back at the auction, the public murmurs on the Grand Hall's balconies while the event takes place. Influential figures covered in dark cloaks observe everything from the honor box. Ray identifies the target's position and notes they are accommodated in the VIP area. Gaia comments that the royal family also occupies that sector, making security tight and access difficult. Displaying no concern, the boy asks in a calm tone if the plan is simply to slaughter everyone. Ray dismisses the idea on the spot, recalling they are on an isolated island and that causing a commotion would harm the mission. After all, the place's isolated location would make a disorderly escape a major problem. He explains calmly that none of that is necessary because as soon as they secure the magic gourd, everything else will be resolved. On stage, the auctioneer gets everyone's attention under the spotlights to begin the bidding. He announces a collection of ultra-rare items brought from across the continent and invites the public to bid on the relics. Wasting no time, the presenter starts the auction introducing the night's first lot. The first product revealed is an elf girl captured in the Great Forest of Lux. The audience reacts enthusiastically while Gaia observes the display in silence. The auctioneer opens the bidding setting, the starting bid at 10 million. Immediately, one of the buyers raises his paddle, topping the amount to 12 million. Right after, another participant tops the bid offering 14 million. Bids rise rapidly to 16, 20, and 22 million, making the environment increasingly tense. Seeing the elf girl's sale, Gaia expresses deep disgust at the situation and curses the adults present. Ray agrees in silence with the statement, keeping his gaze fixed on the auction. Next, the auctioneer announces the night's main attraction, a supreme magical tool created by the legendary Riot Burger. It is the mythical item known as the Demon Summoning Gourd. The presenter highlights that the artifact's power is capable of sealing even the evil dragon Zarksail that recently attacked the capital. The starting value is fixed at 50 million, and the bids climb uncontrollably to 55, 60, and 65 million. Gaia yawns bored seeing the main item finally in play and asks what Ray's strategy will be. Ray gives a discreet smile and raises his paddle to enter the contest directly. Without hesitation, he tops the offers and launches an overwhelming bid of 100 million coins. The auctioneer gets excited at the jump in value and celebrates the huge demand for that legendary item. The presenter asks if there is anyone else willing to top the offer, while Gaia thinks the dispute is over. However, Ray knows very well that the negotiation won't end so easily. Directly from the VIP box, a person raises a paddle topping the amount to 150 million. Ray looks up and confirms who the buyer making the bid is. He smiles satisfied to see that Vice Commander Terrio Dew took the bait perfectly. The auctioneer goes wild on stage, shouting that such a high value only happens once a year in that place. At that exact moment, the masked man stands up from his seat in the box and begins to withdraw. The presenter gestures asking if anyone risks making a bid higher than 150 million. The rest of the audience remains silent, impressed by the exorbitant sum. Realizing no one will top the offer, the auctioneer prepares to bring down the gavel. But the instant he prepares to finalize the sale, a voice echoes through the hall offering 300 million. Ray raises his paddle again without displaying the slightest hesitation. The auctioneer almost loses his mind with emotion as he announces the unbelievable offer of 300 million. With a provocative look, Ray challenges his opponents to bet everything they have. Shortly after, outside the hall, Ray directly approaches Vice Commander Terrio Dew in the garden. Terrio admits he researched the young man and reveals he received a severe scolding because of the previous confrontation. He adjusts his glasses with a dark look, warning that he will return the humiliation in kind. Immediately, several masked, hooded figures emerge from the shadows around the night. Ray passes the turn to his S-rank partner, and Gaia steps forward enthusiastically saying he was looking forward to that. Gaia transforms into a fierce wolf with sharp claws, declaring that everyone there is his prey. He launches himself against the masked figures, slicing through the enemies with brutal and precise attacks. With impressive agility, the boy lands a devastating kick that sends the opponent flying far away. However, upon completing the strike, he senses something strange and stops intrigued. Terrio Diu watches the scene without displaying fear and ironically praises Gaia's strength. The knight gives a malevolent smile, indicating he has a surprise prepared. To Gaia's surprise, the sliced enemies rise from the ground as if nothing had happened. The wolf boy stands incredulous, seeing that the opponents remain standing without a single injury. Wasting no time, the hooded figures resume the charge with full fury. Dodging the strikes, Gaia expresses disgust and asks what kind of monsters those are. Ray realizes Gaia didn't miss his strikes and analyzes the strange energy emanating from those bodies. He notices the decisive detail and concludes that the adversaries are actually jointed puppets. Upon losing its mask, the enemy reveals a facial cloth head without a face covered in stitches. Terrio Diu confirms laughing like crazy and reveals he is using the mythical item Jester's Blood. He mocks, explaining that since they are puppets, poisoning and weakening spells will take zero effect this time. Ray identifies that the technique uses the omnipresent threads, channeling mana to control inanimate objects as if they had life. He feels repulsion seeing a tool created for rescue and medical care used in such a perverse manner. Gaia lets out a mocking laugh upon learning the targets are not human, finding the situation boring. Instead of wasting time with puppets that don't even bleed, he turns his eyes directly to the controller. The wolf boy charges at high speed toward Terrio Diu, eager to tear real flesh. But midway through his leap, Gaia is blocked and thrown to the ground by puppets that feel neither fatigue nor pain. Laughing at the situation, Terrio Diu warns that his puppets are capable of even more surprising tricks. In moments, countless puppet hands emerge from the ground and water to grab the wolf boy. Terrified and sickened, Gaia screams, seeing so many arms sprouting from the earth in a disgusting manner. Terrio Diu celebrates the advantage, warning that the slaughter is only beginning. While watching, Ray reasons that burying so many puppets under the earth and water requires a lot of prep time. He realizes that this whole trap was set up at the location long before they set foot on the island. Slicing through enemies with extreme ease, he begins connecting the conspiracy's dots. The young man concludes that the auction itself is nothing more than a giant trap to lure specific targets. Meanwhile, dozens of puppets pile onto Gaia to suffocate and immobilize the boy. Furious, Gaia releases a devastating energy explosion that shatters all the puppets at once. Losing his patience makes the wolf boy threaten the knight, openly calling him an old man. Offended by the insult, Terrio shouts indignantly, revealing he is only 30 years old. Without showing a drop of pity, Gaia counters, saying 30 years old is already far too old, and charges. The boy laughs insanely as he pins the knight against the ground with full force. Next, an intense light and a frightening energy overflow from the young beast's body. Fallen on the floor, Terrio Diu stares at the transformation, terrified, unable to react. Observing the spectacle, Ray understands that the absurd regeneration displayed in the guild exam came from that transformation. It is the special skill Super Beastification, which elevates his body to the maximum state of a werewolf. The power grants physical capabilities and senses that surpass all human limits, along with an impressive regeneration. Assuming the beast form, Gaia delivers a brutal strike that pierces the knight's chest mercilessly. Ray analyzes that as long as his heart keeps beating, the boy manages to restore any injury on his body. Gaia roars ferociously, displaying his claws ready to continue the slaughter. In shock, Terrio Diu is shredded by a rapid sequence of strikes that destroy his defenses. The boy catches the man's neck with a suffocating grip, lifting his opponent off the ground. Next, he slams the knight to the ground with such violence that it sends the man's glasses flying. Spitting blood and suffocating, the man agonizes on the floor and curses the young man as a monster. With a sadistic smile, Gaia mocks the complaint and pretends to be hurt by the offense. He jokes, saying he is just a cute creature while pressing the knight against the floor. Laughing like crazy, he asks if it hurts and offers to let him go if the man apologizes. He approaches the frightened knight's face and demands an immediate answer. The boy's evil laughter echoes while he amuses himself with his opponent's despair. But before the conversation continues, a swift blade emerges by surprise and decapitates the knight at once. Seeing the head roll on the floor, Gaia shrugs and offers mocking apologies for not understanding the request. Returning to his human form, Gaia complains that he didn't even get to have real fun, while Ray observes him in silence. Ray concludes that the boy's strength exceeds his expectations, and that despite being dangerous, he will be very useful if used correctly. Gaia turns to speak with the young man and propose the next step of the mission. However, mid-sentence, a sword pierces Gaia's chest coming from the shadows behind him. The boy spits blood in shock without understanding where that surprise attack came from. A mysterious man wearing knight's armor and a cloak emerges wielding the blood-stained blade. He steps on the boy's fallen body and makes a provocative question in a mocking tone. It is Dan Kraft, who mocks his opponent's weakness with a wicked smile. He presses his boot against the boy's helpless body and mocks the situation once more. With his sword on his shoulder under the moonlight, Dan reaffirms that Ray's partner was far too weak. Ray remains motionless a few steps away, staring at the new enemy that just appeared. The shock is inevitable upon recognizing that that merciless assassin is the same friendly young man he met in the city. He stares at Dan and realizes the true nature hidden behind that friendly facade. Dan turns with a casual smile and greets him as if they were running into each other by chance on a walk. He looks at the boy bleeding on the ground and asks innocently if Ray was friends with that poor guy. Right after, he wields his blade with a sadistic look and warns that if they are partners, he will have to eliminate him too. With a cold mind, Ray confirms his suspicions upon understanding that Dan also belongs to the enemy Knight Order. He could hardly believe it when he saw that name on the meeting documents, but reality was right before his eyes. Realizing his adversary's silence, the cloaked man wastes no time and advances to continue the attack. With an insane smile on his face, the warrior interprets the lack of answer as confirmation and charges full force. The blade cuts through the air in an extremely fast strike, creating an energy shock that echoes across the battlefield. Without hesitation, our protagonist activates his magical item creation ability and summons the sacred sword Excalibur to contain the impact. Impressed by the quick reaction, the enemy captain lets out a laugh and admits he didn't expect to have his attack blocked so easily. With absurd pressure, the collision's force pushes both sides and spreads gusts of wind across the entire area. Skidding across the ground, our protagonist realizes that his opponent possesses not only speed, but also terrifying raw power. The two stare closely at each other, locking in a tense duel where any slip could prove fatal. The swords clash repeatedly in a frantic exchange of strikes, throwing sparks every second. Faced with the protagonist's cold look, the captain realizes the fight's gravity and knows that any mistake could cost his life. Maintaining his provocation, the warrior backs off and asks if he only knows how to retreat instead of trading real blows. Adjusting Excalibur's grip, he replies calmly that it had just been a long time since he faced a familiar face. Looking firmly at his adversary, he warns that he needed a moment to finally enter the serious rhythm of the fight. Hearing that, the warrior gets even more excited and asserts that that was exactly the answer he wanted to hear. In the blink of an eye, our protagonist appears right in front of him, catching his rival completely by surprise. A relentless sequence of slashes cuts through the air, forcing his opponent to bend over backward to defend himself. Our hero's gaze remains fully concentrated, predicting every movement of the enemy before the attack even happens. Instead of being intimidated, the captain flashes a sadistic smile and vibrates with the insane intensity of the confrontation. The battle spreads across the ramparts, generating light explosions and energy shocks visible from afar. Pressed against the structure, the opponent acknowledges the level of the protagonist's skills and praises his performance. He makes it clear that his rival is impressive, but warns him not to celebrate because the combat has barely begun. Charging forward again with total fury, the knight shouts that they are only just beginning to truly fight. The clash between blades creates a gigantic impact wave that makes the entire surrounding area shake. Blocking the attack with absolute precision, the protagonist internally evaluates his adversary's spectacular strength. He recognizes that the First Division gathers the most ferocious warriors among the knights, and that he possesses full capacity to be the captain. With skills of that tier, he would have stood out even in the Royal Independent Mobile Unit in its prime days. Our protagonist reflects that if he were in his old body or previous state, he would have been eliminated instantly by that blow. However, the current situation is completely different and he won't be surpassed so easily. Surprising his rival, he extends his hand and catches the blade directly without needing to use his sword. The captain stands incredulous, seeing the strike restrained with bare hands and questions how that is possible. Looking firmly, our hero warns that that type of charge will no longer work against him. Releasing a devastating surge of power, he repels his opponent with an absurd force that sends him flying far away. The knight's body is launched against the castle structures, breaking walls until finally coming to a stop. Fallen in the rubble and massaging his neck, the captain complains of the pain, visibly surprised by the impact. Smiling despite the destruction, he says he hadn't been launched far like that since he dueled against Master Swordstar. Gripping his weapon's hilt, an electrical aura begins to spread across his entire body. Consumed by an insane enthusiasm, he states that defeating someone of that level will be the most incredible feeling of all. Noticing the lightning enveloping his rival, our protagonist immediately realizes that his element is thunder. Using his swift technique, the captain transforms into a bolt of electricity and charges at ultra-high speed. The lightning flash technique cuts through the battlefield in an instant, trying to catch the hero defenseless. In the very last millisecond, our protagonist turns and manages to block the swift electrical attack. The impact of lightning and sparks makes the captain himself marvel to see that his maximum charge was contained. Leaping backward, he laughs out loud and praises our hero's impressive reflexes. Determined to give no breathing room, the knight prepares a new strike loaded with even more electrical energy. He fires the radiant lightning technique, unleashing a massive arc of thunder toward the protagonist. Reacting on the spot, our hero activates his item creation ability and summons the sacred shield Aegis. The magical barrier rises and absorbs the entire impact of the electrical attack without moving an inch. Taking advantage of the curtain of sparks, his rival reappears by surprise behind his back, firing the roaring lightning technique. A storm of electrical thrusts is unleashed in sequence, testing the maximum limit of the protagonist's defense. Advancing with an insane smile, the captain delivers a fierce thrust and asks what the protagonist thinks of that attack. The blow grazes our hero's shoulder, opening a small cut and making him let out a stifled groan. Wasting no time, the protagonist summons the creation technique Scarlet Whip of Lamentation. Several glowing red chains project and begin spiraling around the opponent's body. Realizing the trap, the knight makes an agile leap backward to escape the chain's entrapment. However, our hero appears instantly behind him and murmurs coldly for him not to get too carried away. A massive energy explosion is fired point blank, sending the enemy flying violently through the air. Landing amid the smoke, the captain questions how many weapons he is hiding and if he happens to be some kind of mage. Refusing to give up, the knight begins concentrating an absurd amount of electricity around himself. He prepares his ultimate technique, Supreme Vortex, Extreme Roaring Lightning, ready to end the fight. Hearing the provocation, our hero agrees in a calm tone while a crimson aura begins to envelop his arm. Materializing a glowing arcana gauntlet, he decides it is already time to end that combat quickly. Activating the true magical item, Qlifoth Dragon Slayer, he thinks to himself that the captain is not his real objective. Sensing the overwhelming pressure emanating from the protagonist, the captain panics and realizes he is in trouble. Releasing the Devour Darkness technique, the hero advances at frightening speed toward the enemy. The gauntlet's impact strikes the knight's chest directly, nullifying his entire electrical attack at once. A gigantic spiral of black and red energy forms at the impact point, distorting all the surrounding air. The impact's force generates an incandescent point of light in the middle of the courtyard that expands in fractions of a second. A monumental column of destruction rises to the sky, completely devastating the terrain and making the earth shake. As the dust settles, our hero observes the huge crater left by the attack while his gauntlet begins to dissipate. He looks at his own bleeding hand, noting the damage caused by using such a destructive power. The residual dark energy still floats through the air, testifying to the overwhelming force of the technique used. The scene of the direct clash reinforces the brutal power difference when the hero decides to fight with full force. All the opponent's electricity extinguishes completely after being swallowed by the attack's energy. Captain Dan lies fallen and defeated among the rubble, completely out of strength to continue battling. Before passing out, he recognizes the dark lightning and wonders if that came from the Elakanoa he handed over in the past. Closing his hand, our protagonist completely undoes the manifestation of his true magical item. He reflects on the high mana consumption and acknowledges that, had he not used this technique, they would have been defeated. Approaching his fallen rival, the hero hears his coughing and feels relieved to confirm he is still breathing. As he prepares to uncover the true identity behind the attack, an intense golden glow emerges out of nowhere. An imposing, mysterious figure appears from the middle of the light, immediately drawing our hero's attention. Observing that familiar glow, the protagonist instantly recalls events and encounters from his past. The memory of the former masked client comes to his mind, connecting the pieces of that situation. The intense light begins to dissipate, gradually revealing the features of the person who has just arrived. The man reveals himself fully, wearing a noble white outfit, long hair, and an extremely cold gaze. In a parallel scene, the reddish ally flies into a rage upon realizing that figure is the true contractor. Looking at the unconscious body on the floor, the noble comments with disdain that Dan ended up defeated. The captain remains motionless in the rubble, unable to react or help his superior. With an expression of extreme contempt, the man stares at the protagonist and calls him a scoundrel. Releasing a threatening black aura, the new enemy demands to know what the hero's true identity is. He launches a devastating attack using the same Devour Darkness technique against our protagonist. With a quick movement, our hero manages to dodge by a thread from the energy blade cutting the air. The contractor stands surprised to notice a light cut on himself, incredulous that skin tougher than mithril was pierced. Appearing by his side, the hero warns coldly that he is exuding far too much bloodlust. In the next instant, a storm of light blades envelops the protagonist, forcing him to cross his arms to defend himself. Suffering several cuts across his body, he admits he covered his skin with magic in time, but still suffered serious damage. Stepping back with difficulty, he realizes that even being exhausted from the previous fight, the disadvantage is far too large. Supporting himself on the ground, our hero stares at his adversary and concludes that that individual is on a completely different level. The enemy advances relentlessly, delivering a heavy blow that presses the protagonist's stance to the limit. Gritting his teeth, our hero notes that his current mana is insufficient and that he will lose if he insists on a direct confrontation of force. Realizing the need to change strategy, our hero concentrates energy in the palm of his hand and decides to act fast. He activates the creation skill for the magical item Tongue Cutter Thorn, which possesses the special property of expanding wounds and preventing bleeding from stopping. His plan is to close the distance for hand-to-hand combat, neutralizing the enemy's advantage with his large sword. Combining martial arts with high-precision swordsmanship, the protagonist goes on the attack without giving reaction time to his rival. The charge is so fast and sneaky that it catches his opponent off guard at the exact moment of the attack. Advancing with total resolve, our hero delivers a sequence of point-blank lethal blows. A storm of red slashes hits the opponent, trying to breach his defense and cause continuous damage. The blade manages to tear the enemy's cheek, making blood trickle down and activating the weapon's effect. Noticing the wound that won't stop bleeding, the noble immediately realizes it is a magical item made to expand cuts. Analyzing the protagonist's movement, he recalls that fighting style is exactly the same as someone from the past. However, the enemy does not let himself be shaken and prepares an immediate reaction to contain the charge. Tossing his own weapon into the air, he catches the protagonist off guard with a completely unexpected maneuver. Taking advantage of the gap, the noble lands a devastating strike on the hero, making him let out a cry of pain. He executes a brutal countercharge that completely destabilizes our protagonist's combat stance. With the impact's force, the hero is launched violently through the air, falling toward the sea outside the castle. The large sword falls back perfectly into the noble's hand, showing absolute combat mastery. Falling with nothing to hold on to, our hero tries to regain control while the enemy prepares up above. Raising the sword with both hands, the noble concentrates a monumental amount of glowing energy around the blade. Looking coldly at the hero, he asserts that the young man is far from managing to compare to that person from the past. He delivers a devastating downward slash that cuts through the air and goes straight toward the protagonist. The shockwave hits the ground and water, creating a gigantic curtain of dust while the noble lands impressively. Watching the destruction caused, he acknowledges that the boy had some skill, but that it was nothing beyond that. Injured among the rubble, Captain Dan makes an effort to rise and respectfully calls for his lord, Sword Star. Supporting his subordinate, Sword Star tells him not to say anything so as not to worsen the severity of his injuries. Supporting himself with difficulty, our hero analyzes his rival's strike and realizes it was a perfect charge of attack and defense. He recognizes that Sword Star's fighting style is both powerful and flexible, demonstrating absurd experience in wars. Given his current state of exhaustion, the protagonist admits his chances of direct victory would be minimal. Even aware of the enormous danger, he grits his teeth and refuses unconditionally to let that man escape from there. Observing the surrounding scenario, our hero remembers an important detail about what happened in the battle. He realizes he ended up not recovering the item known as the magic summoning gourd during the combat. At that moment, Sword Star begins charging a sword technique of catastrophic proportions. Noticing the frightening buildup of magical power, the protagonist immediately recognizes the legendary technique being prepared. Releasing his supreme technique called Starburst, the enemy unleashes a beam of light that cuts across the entire horizon. A colossal column of energy slices through the fortress from end to end, vaporizing everything in its path. From an aerial view, it is possible to see the radiant beam ripping through the entire island from one side to the other. An apocalyptic explosion unfolds, destroying the terrain and shattering the island's structure completely. The colossal shock devastates the entire region, reducing the fortress and ground to mere dust and floating stones. After the gale of destruction ceases, Sword Star remains intact at the site holding the captain in his arms. The sea invades the abyss created by the explosion, covering the place where the entire island once existed. Walking to the debris, Sword Star picks up the magic summoning gourd that had been left on the ground. With the gourd in hand, he coldly declares that he will never allow anyone to stand in the way of his goals. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the dark sea, our hero's body sinks slowly through the deep waters. Sinking into darkness, he recalls seeing that same technique in the past Continental War, used by the legendary Sword Saint. He explains that he used wave cancellation to erase his presence and leaped into the sea to escape the fatal strike, but knows he will need meticulous preparation to win. Overcome by a burning rage, the hero opens his eyes underwater and cries out Sword Star's name. Swearing vengeance at the bottom of the ocean, he promises he will survive and that he will certainly hunt him down and eliminate him. Farther away, a wooden boat navigates the rough waters under a lantern's light. The ally wearing glasses aboard the vessel looks at the horizon with an expression of absolute shock. He observes the vastness of the sea and realizes horrified that the island simply vanished from the map. Terrified by what he just witnessed, he thinks apprehensively if the protagonist ended up perishing in that explosion. Suddenly, a soaked hand emerges from the ocean waters and grabs the edge of the small wooden boat. Our protagonist pulls himself up with difficulty and leans on the vessel, leaving the ally wearing glasses in shock to see that he survived. Supporting the weakened hero, his friend asks indignantly what happened for him to be beaten so severely. Gasping and almost out of strength, the protagonist stammers that he finally got what he needed, leaving his companion confused. Leaning on the wood, he clenches his fist tightly while an aura of icy determination begins to emanate from his body. Raising a gaze consumed by dark fury, he firmly declares that he finally found the whereabouts of said contractor. Elsewhere, inside a medical capsule filled with greenish liquid, the injured young man breathes through a mask while receiving treatment. Already recovered and sitting in his hideout, our hero observes the treatment tank and admits to his female ally that he faced a frightening enemy. He vents saying that not even in perfect condition could he beat him, making the woman mockingly ask if the great Riot Burger is whining. Maintaining a serious posture, Riot clarifies that he is merely doing a tactical analysis to ensure he can eliminate him next time. Curious about the account, the woman asks if he managed to discover the true identity of the one who defeated him in battle. Clenching his hand with conviction, our hero confirms he found out exactly who it is. It was the leader of the Order of Knights and considered the realm's great symbol of peace, the legendary sword star Haste. He recalls that the leader's subordinates, Dan and Terrio, were also acting directly under his command. However, Riot ponders that they didn't seem to be sharing information openly, since Dan didn't even know who he was dealing with. He reflects on the scandal it would be if the populace discovered that the Order of Knights itself, responsible for punishing evil, is plotting a war. Hearing the revelation, the woman from the underworld mocks that the Order's nobles managed to be even more rotten than people from the underworld. Adjusting his coat, Riot recommends she notify the royal army to protect the citizens, as the future confrontation will be inevitable and noisy. Realizing he is about to leave, the ally observes the hero walking toward the guild's massive armored door. With his gaze fixed on the goal, Riot states that the enemy is almost within his reach and that he has no time to waste. Before he opens the door, a green snake appears on his shoulder, carrying an electronic device in its mouth, and tells him to wait. Looking at the small access card held in the reptile's fangs, Riot questions what that item is about. The woman explains that since he brought data from the Order, the magic gourd, and even saved Gaia's life, she has no choice but to acknowledge his value. With an imposing look, she declares that the mission was successfully completed and officially promotes him to S rank. Upon taking the object, our hero realizes surprised that he received the access key to the confidential reading room. With an enigmatic smile, the underworld leader tells him to make good use of the information contained in that place. The location houses the data terminal at the core of the Table of Ruin Guild, allowing consultation of all kinds of confidential documents for his research. Adjusting a spider-shaped device on his glove, Riot promises himself he won't make the same mistake twice and will devise a perfect plan. With flames of vengeance in his eyes, the protagonist vows that this time he will eliminate Swordstar without leaving any margin for error. Meanwhile, in his sumptuous castle office, Swordstar Haste himself analyzes documents at his work desk. Dan quietly opens the door and asks if his superior is available to talk. Without taking his eyes off the papers, Swordstar coldly notifies that, if the topic is the vice commander position, he already aligned everything with the Pope. Disappointed, the subordinate vents saying the answer was dull, as he expected to receive a direct recommendation for the post. Staring at him with his usual stern gaze, the commander questions if he came there just to banter. Changing the subject with a wicked smile, Dan reveals that he ended up remembering a very important detail about that individual. Continuing to write with his quill, Swordstar asks indifferently who he is talking about, and Dan mentions Ray's name. The commander replies with disdain that he has zero interest in people who are already dead. However, when Dan asks what he would think if he knew that the boy is actually alive, Swordstar's quill freezes on the paper. The Order's leader slowly turns his face, staring at the subordinate with a sharp and surprised gaze. Dan explains that they had already bumped into each other in the city before, and that, on that occasion, Ray made a curious revelation. In the past, the young man had mentioned he was introduced directly through the Brown Trading Company. Dan shares that he thoroughly investigated President Leto Brown's life and personally ransacked all his secret hideouts. In a provocative tone, the captain asks his commander what he thinks he found hidden at the location. It is the mask worn by the boy, the exact one that should have been destroyed along with him in the big explosion. Dan confirms that the accessory matched the description of the auction guest perfectly, boasting about his flawless memory. Connecting the dots of that revelation, Swordstar's gaze fills with deep and concerning shock. The commander abruptly stands up, knocking over his chair, leaving Dan surprised at the exaggerated reaction. Overcome by a sudden sense of urgency, Swordstar takes long strides toward his private compartment. He opens a secret passage and approaches the shelves where he keeps his confidential files and boxes. Extending his gloved hand with caution, he prepares to open the secret compartment and verify the hidden content. Closely examining the item he just pulled from the compartment, Swordstar analyzes the artifact's texture and energy. With his gaze narrowing in fury, the commander immediately notices the deception and confirms his worst suspicions. Clenching his fist with crushing force, he shatters the object without the slightest effort. Watching the shards fall to the floor, Swordstar angrily notes that the recovered item is nothing more than a false replica. While the fragments scatter, the small hidden tracker in spider format moves discreetly across the floor. The device ends up crushed by magical pressure, making the commander admit angrily that he was completely tricked. Resting his sword on his shoulder with a sarcastic smile, Dan asks his superior what he intends to do now. Taking a step forward with a dark aura, Swordstar coldly declares that his decision is already made. Walking right past his subordinate, the Order's leader states he will erase all evidence of the case so as not to leave traces. A few days pass, showing a serene view of the Imperial City and the local cemetery under the blue sky. In his laboratory, our protagonist holds delicately by the web the magical item replica made in spider format. He reflects satisfied that the plan to forge the mythical artifact worked far better than he imagined. Observing the blue projections, our hero confirms he managed to discover the exact location of the stolen mythical item. He concludes it was the right decision to add the sleep function to the universal strings to prevent his magical power from being detected like last time. Before the displays, the protagonist notes that the enemy found only one of the fake lures he had prepared. Meanwhile, the true tracker remains hidden and attached to the structure where the real artifact is stored. Adjusting his cloak over his shoulders, the hero prepares to initiate the next stage of his plan. With a confident smile under his hood, he celebrates that now he will be able to track the artifact no matter where they move it. Walking disguised through the city's busy streets, our hero thinks about the last pieces of information he needs to obtain. Suddenly, the protagonist stops abruptly in the middle of the crowd upon witnessing a shocking scene. In the center of the square, Order soldiers keep Hyuna and Merchant Leto Brown completely tied up by ropes. One of the guards displays a poster to the residents, announcing that cultists are being suppressed and that there is a reward. The wanted poster displays the image of our hero's face, offering a large sum dead or alive. Watching everything from among the people, the protagonist keeps his face hidden while processing the enemy's trap. With his gaze sparking in fury under his hood, the hero realizes Haste decided to take the first step in that dispute. Back at the core of the Table of Ruin, the protagonist positions himself before the gigantic data terminal. Operating the holographic interface, he concludes that the Order of Knights has already discovered he is still alive. He analyzes that the only information the enemies possess are his actions as Adventurer Ray and his connection to the Brown Company. Because of this, the Order falsely framed Leto and Hyuna as cultists to use them as hostages. The hero understands perfectly that this whole staging was planned by Haste merely to lure him into an ambush. Touching the terminal screen, he finally finds the confidential file he had been searching for. Several holographic windows open before him, revealing detailed reports on the commander's history. The document displays Swordstar Haste's full file, revealing secrets kept for decades. Staring at his rival's image with his gaze shining with determination, the hero vows he will make Haste display all his power. A flashback from 25 years ago reveals that the realm suffered a devastating defeat against the Arkland Empire, being pushed back to the border. Amid the burning ruins of the destroyed city, young Haste cried desperately over his deceased mother's body. Without any compassion, an enemy soldier's boot violently kicks the boy's back to shove him out of the way. Invading Imperial soldiers surround the helpless child while shouting death threats with cruelty. Fallen in the dirt, little Haste cries in pain, staring at the aggressors with a look full of hatred and resentment. Bothered by the boy's defiant glare, the Imperial soldier asks angrily the reason for that look. Another guard tries to restrain his comrade, warning that there could still be realm soldiers patrolling the region. The soldier snaps and tells his partner to shut up, asserting that those cowards fled the battlefield long ago. Grabbing young Haste violently by his collar, he rants that the boy isn't the only victim of that war. Consumed by rage, the invader shouts in the child's face, asking if he knows how many comrades and family members they lost. With eyes bloodshot with rage, the soldier vents that if the realm didn't exist, his own son would still be alive. The comrade-in-arms observes in silence, feeling the weight of pain and loss brought by the brutal war. Gritting his teeth with resentment, the invader vows he will eliminate the child to avenge his son's death. He hurls little Haste violently against the wooden debris of the destroyed house. Holding up a flaming torch, the soldier declares his absolute hatred against all residents of the realm. Consumed by war madness, the invader incites general slaughter while young Haste watches horrified at that traumatic scene. In an act of pure cruelty, the enemy soldier strikes little Haste with a burning torch, burning the helpless child. The invader lets out a hysterical laugh at the boy's suffering, shouting that it served him right. Fallen on the ground, little Haste groans in pain amidst the flames, bleeding and fighting to stay conscious. The soldier continues laughing uncontrollably, celebrating the cruel revenge against a child of the realm. Suddenly, a glowing blue blade beam cuts through the air and liquidates the aggressor in the blink of an eye. An imposing warrior wearing a dark overcoat emerges before the flames, catching those present by surprise. It is Riot Burger himself in the past, who coldly declares that torturing weak and innocent people is not retaliation. The other Imperial soldier trembles from head to toe upon recognizing the terrifying identity of the man before him. Without giving the slightest chance to react, Riot strikes down the enemy instantly with a single clean sword strike. Sheathing his weapon, he comments to himself that now the village is finally free of invading soldiers. Little Haste remains fallen on the ground, groaning in pain due to severe injuries spread across his body. Kneeling with compassion, Riot picks up the boy in his arms and apologizes for arriving too late to save him. He hands a high-quality potion to the boy, telling him to drink it to ease the suffering. Examining the boy's injured face, Riot notices with concern that his eyes were seriously affected by the attack. At that moment, knights from the Royal Army Order arrive at the scene mounted on their horses to support the region. The knights' leader notifies that they will take over the village and asks Riot to keep advancing with the front line. Handing the boy over to the soldier's care, Riot asks that a doctor attend to him immediately to save his vision. The knight accommodates Little Haste carefully on his mount's saddle to take him away safely. The soldier tries to reassure the child, warning that the path will be a bit rough, but for him to hold on tight. Looking at the glowing trail of light cutting across the night sky, the boy asks who that man was who saved him. The image of Riot Burger rushing into the battlefield with divine speed stays engraved in the boy's memory. With eyes shining in deep admiration, the knight replies that that man is the legendary hero of the realm. Returning to the present, our hero reads the record stating that Haste was taken in by the Houseman family and joined the order at age 13. The file further reveals that at age 25, Haste was nominated by his predecessor and became the youngest sword star. Continuing the reading of confidential documents, Riot notes he found the transcript of an interview conducted last year. The text praises Haste's 10 years in the sword star position, being acclaimed by everyone as the symbol of justice and the strongest. The reporter asks in the interview what the personal big dream of the one considered the greatest warrior would be. Modestly, Haste replies that the title of strongest does not fit him, and that he still doesn't consider himself worthy of that moniker. He considers that, if a war broke out at that moment, he still wouldn't have enough power to stop it alone. Questioned if that wouldn't be impossible for any human, Haste asserts with conviction that only one person could accomplish such a feat. Reading the interview snippet, Riot discovers that Haste believed this person possessed the miraculous power to make the impossible possible. Intrigued by the account, our hero wonders who the commander was referring to with so much admiration. In the document transcript, the name cited by Haste is directly revealed: Riot Burger. Haste was referring to the man who put an end to the Continental War and was crowned as the great hero of the realm. The text reveals Haste's secret determination. His dream was to surpass Riot Burger's legacy and become the strongest being of all. In the present, Sword Star Haste himself waits in silence inside a tent set up near the gallows. Dan pulls open the tent curtain and asks in a playful tone if he can already start the planned grand event. Staring at his subordinate with a cold, focused gaze, the commander gives authorization to begin the execution. With a sadistic smile and sharp teeth, the captain answers enthusiastically and departs to fulfill his orders. Dan runs toward the platform set up in the square, where a crowd of residents waits anxiously. Alone in the tent, Haste thinks about having spent 25 years relentlessly chasing the shadow of the hero of the realm. He flies into a rage upon remembering that legendary man threw his strength away and reduced himself to a mere helpless old man. Clenching his fist in hatred, the commander vows he will never accept having a weak and miserable fate like that. He asserts with conviction that he will obtain overwhelming power capable of crushing any absurdity in the world. Raising his head with unyielding resolve, he vows he will do whatever necessary to reach the absolute top. Meanwhile, Dan positions himself before the wooden posts on the execution stage. The captain raises his voice to the assembled crowd, announcing solemnly that the event will begin from that moment on. Merchant Leto Brown remains with his head lowered and tied to the post, awaiting the unjust sentence. By his side, young Hyuna stares at the captain with a look of pure contempt and contained rage. Raising his arms to the cheering crowd in the square, Dan shouts that the public execution of the cultists will be carried out immediately. From atop a nearby roof, our protagonist silently observes the entire square, tracking the movement of the crowd around the execution stage. With the wind rustling his coat and a completely firm gaze, he prepares to step in and put his plan into action at the exact moment.